Chapter 2434 Weird Girl. Han Sun felt something very powerful coming his way. His body leaned back reflexively, trying to get away from it. The blonde girl leaped on top of him. Miss Mirror didn't move as the girl jumped and wrapped her arms around Han Sun's neck, her weight slamming into his chest and taking him to the ground. They both became entangled, just as the fifth picture on the screen had shown. Han Sun had prepared himself for the inevitable fight, and as they fell, Han Sun's eyes started to turn white as he summoned his super god spirit body. Big brother, Wana has been waiting for you to come back. The blonde girl was riding Han Sun hard, and she now wore a beautiful smile. She clutched his face, lowered her head, and kissed Han Sun on the forehead. Han Sun was stunned. He didn't know what was going on, but the glowing white in his eyes started to recede. Han Sun was still trying to summon his super god spirit body, but it vanished after the girl kissed him. Something else disappeared too. The blonde girl's golden light rapidly faded into nothing. The blonde hair that had shone like a sun was now like a fire that had been extinguished. It darkened until she had a full head of black hair. Even her golden pupils were now as dark as ink. I can finally be with Big Brother again. Wana pulled herself back upright, sitting on Han Sun's chest. She looked at Han Sun with her beautiful smile. That sweet and happy smile made Han Sun freeze. At that moment, she looked so incredibly innocent. The next second, her eyelids fluttered closed. She looked soft as she slumped down on Han Sun's chest, and a few seconds later, she lost consciousness. Hey, lady, you have it wrong. I'm not your big brother. Han Sun shifted the girl who referred to herself as Wana, sliding his arms under her, as he climbed back to his feet. Her skin appeared smooth, and it was very soft. Han Sun could no longer feel her scary presence and power. Her life force had dropped to a tiny fraction of what it had been. Now she was as weak as a commoner in this universe, or perhaps even weaker. If Han Sun hadn't seen her transform with his own eyes, he never would have imagined that this black-haired girl was the blonde girl who had taken out the deified night wind in a single blow. Han Sun realized that the tattoo of the nine-life cat on her back was now gone. The skin of her back was smooth and white as if the tattoo had never existed in the first place. What is going on? Han Sun frowned. When he scanned the girl, he confirmed that she had passed out, but she was still alive. Her life force was so low that it was concerning, however. It was hard to imagine how she had been able to blast out the scary power she had used earlier. Lady, wake up. Han Sun pressed his finger to her lips to see if she really was in a coma, or if she was just pretending instead. But he quickly pulled his finger back, startled. The girl Wana didn't wake up, and her pink skin was bleeding where Han Sun had pressed his finger, as if her skin was fragile and paper-thin. Han Sun hadn't even used strength. With the strength she had previously demonstrated, there should have been no way for Han Sun to leave a mark on her body, even if he used his full strength. But he had just slightly tapped her lips, and now the skin was broken and bleeding. She was no longer what she had been when she first woke up. What is this? What's going on with her? Han Sun looked at the girl weirdly. Miss Mirror eventually got back to her feet. She picked up the broken sword and tried to stab Lady Wana. Han Sun tightened his arms around the girl and dodged. Miss Mirror directed a hard stare at him. What are you doing? Now is the best time to kill her. If she wakes up and becomes that blonde bitch again, we won't be able to kill her. Then we'll be the ones to die. Han Sun frowned and looked at the girl. He had thought about doing this as well. He knew Miss Mirror was right. The girl's body was like that of an average person right now. A random strike could kill her. This really was their best chance. If she woke up and engaged her blondie mode, he and Miss Mirror would be unable to touch her. They might be in grave danger. In the sixth picture, there were only two faceless people. That meant one of them was gone. If they didn't kill the blonde girl now, that meant one of them would have to die. What happened next might be a conflict between Han Sun and Miss Mirror. Because of all these things, killing the girl really seemed like the best choice. It would certainly sort out many of their current troubles, and it could heighten their chances for survival. But Han Sun still hesitated. What Wana said to Han Sun before she fainted made him think. He didn't think he was actually Wana's big brother. But killing a girl who wasn't currently hostile and couldn't fight back was something Han Sun couldn't make himself do. And there was one thing that really did nag at him. His super god spirit body was supposed to be invincible, but the girl's power had been able to cancel its activation. He was really confused about what had happened there. His super god spirit power hadn't been destroyed, just pushed back. Han Sun could activate the super god spirit body again, but the girl had done something that he had never experienced before. He cared deeply about what it could mean. Miss Mirror knew what Han Sun was thinking. She lifted the sword and pointed it at the girl, saying, "Don't get fooled by what she said. She probably knew she couldn't last long, and that's why she said it. She wanted to give you a reason to keep her alive. Shouldn't you know that she isn't your real sister?" "She isn't my sister, but I can't do it." Han Sun took off his jacket and covered the girl's body. The girl could have killed him, but she hadn't. Han Sun knew that things were not as Miss Mirror was saying. "If you cannot do it, then I will do it." Miss Mirror growled, "I'm sorry, but there is something I would like to ask her." "Let's decide once she has woken up," Han Sun said as he held the girl. "You are a gentleman, but you seem to have forgotten what the sixth picture depicts." Miss Mirror laughed darkly. "I didn't forget. But you really don't think that can predict our future, do you?" Han Sun asked calmly. "I don't know if it can predict our future, but everything predicted by the prior pictures came true. We have to be careful," Miss Mirror said. Han Sun knew Miss Mirror was correct. He sighed and said, "You should just go. Let me handle this. I will continue to explore. Even if the prophetic picture is correct, it doesn't say that whoever isn't in the picture ends up dead. You and I have exchanged minds. You know what my personality is like." Miss Mirror didn't move. She raised the sword and pointed it at the girl in Han Sun's arms. Han Sun knew Miss Mirror's personality well. She was ambitious, and that ambition compelled her to control every scenario. She wouldn't allow others to dictate what course her future would take. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to the stone fields in the first place. She only had to send Han Sun, Night Wind, or even Red Cloud. "My lady, can't you see that we are walking right into that prophecy?" Han Sun looked at Miss Mirror. He had never believed in the prophecy anyway. Chapter 24:35 Person in the stone. Around the same time as the girl broke out of the egg, the human stone in the camp melted like ice. But instead of water, a substance that looked like blood emerged from the melting stone. The two guinea pigs inside the warehouse witnessed this happen, and they backed away from the stone with wide eyes. They screamed and turned to run, but when their mouths opened, they stopped mid-stride. Their eyes turned red, and a scary presence came out of them. More of that red blood oozed from the stone. It began to rise from the ground as a vapor, spreading to fill the surrounding air. All the members of Spring Rain and the workers that were nearby fell under the influence of that invisible power. They all leveled up, their power increasing so quickly that it almost seemed like they were cheating. They increased one level, and their genes grew stronger. All of the nearby kings became half-deified, and the half-deifieds actually downgraded to become measly dukes. The creatures that had already been affected by the stone didn't change again. But other than those few who had already been altered, there was only one anomaly, Ningyu. He hadn't been affected in any capacity. His little green sword groaned, then flew up and landed in Ningyu's hand. It shone green, bathing him in a protective light. In Han Sun's room, Bao was still playing games with Falling Leaf. She looked up suddenly, and her face grew worried. She raised her hand and summoned a little gourd. The little gourd shone with a weird light of its own, covering herself, Falling Leaf, and the little red bird. "What are you doing?" Falling Leaf asked, having no idea what Bao was actually doing. She saw the shining little gourd, but she didn't notice any of the other powers that were at play. "Nothing. Let's continue our card game," Bao said with a blink. Falling Leaf made no comment, and they resumed their game. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, the stone had completely melted. A white-haired man with white clothing had been revealed, sitting exactly where the stone had been. He looked pale, and he smelled musty and ancient. It was as if he had been sitting there forever, watching the days and the moons go by, and the stars themselves fall to darkness. Time must have moved like a river for him. It was like nothing in the world could leave a mark on him. The rise and fall of empires were mere moments to a man like this. He let out a sigh. The man opened his eyes, And then he spoke to himself. After all these lifetimes, I just want to get drunk with you. Is there any point living in this world without you? The white-haired man stood up and exited the warehouse. The infected creatures of the base, meanwhile, were in the midst of fighting each other. Their levels had increased or decreased, and their eyes had turned red. They became insane and bloodthirsty, trying to kill anyone they could reach. All kinds of powers were being used across the base. If the base hadn't been built out of the sturdy black rock, it would have been reduced to a ruin by now. The white-haired man walked through the various pitched battles, but none of the crazed people attacked him. No power dared to land on him. He slid through the base like a ghost, immaterial and untouchable. The man walked out of the base camp and turned his gray eyes up to look at the stars above. The buildings behind him began to collapse under the ferocity of the fights, and explosions of power bloomed like fireworks. But the man was wholly uninterested, and he continued talking to himself. This world is so boring without you. The white-haired man looked at the base, and his eyes drifted toward Bauer's room. Then his calm eyes suddenly looked shocked. Pang! Falling Leaf and Bauer were in the middle of playing card games. Suddenly, a booming noise shook the room, and the walls collapsed like the petals of a flower. But not a single piece of debris came near them. When Falling Leaf looked outside, her eyes opened wide. The entire base was little more than a ruin. Spring Rain members and workers were all mixed together, fighting and killing each other, like they'd been possessed. Dead bodies and torn flesh were strewn about in pools of blood. Are you guys crazy? Falling Leaf shouted. But the crazed fighters paid no heed to her cry. They continued butchering each other in a frenzy. Amidst the killing, the white-haired man walked gracefully toward them. He moved effortlessly through the destruction, and the violence fell away from him like oil over water. Falling Leaf's heart leaped inside her chest. She flipped her hand and quickly brought out a dagger. She looked at the white-haired man and said firmly, "Stop. If you step closer, I'll kill you." The white-haired man behaved as if he hadn't heard her. He kept walking toward the room, peering at Bauer, who was atop the sofa. She gave 3 warnings, but the white-haired man didn't seem to hear her. Falling Leaf had no idea what was going on, but Miss Mirror had commanded that she look after Bauer and keep the girl safe. And that was exactly what Falling Leaf would do. She thrust her dagger at the white-haired man. Falling Leaf's entire person seemed to connect with the universe. For a moment she was extending her dagger in an attack, and that moment froze, hovering like an afterimage. Then the afterimage vanished, and the only thing left behind was the sinking feeling of watching yellow leaves fall in late autumn, withered and dying. That feeling of death flashed by the white-haired man harmless. Falling Leaf was back where she had started as if nothing had happened. But Falling Leaf's pupils grew smaller. Her assassination skills were top-notch, and her full power attacks were a threat to even deified elites. But this man had simply ignored her attack, and he was still headed for Bauer as if nothing had happened. How is that possible? Falling Leaf couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at the white-haired man. Her chest constricted with sudden fear. She had no idea how the white-haired man might have broken her strongest attack. Although he didn't look strong, there was a cold feeling in her stomach. Merely looking at the man gave Falling Leaf the creeps. The man never looked at Falling Leaf though. His attention was focused on Bauer. Bauer grabbed her little gourd. Her face looked very dire, and she stared at the man as if he was an enemy. Boom! The little red bird on Bauer's shoulder seemed to feel that it needed to intervene as well. It flew off of Bauer's shoulder, becoming a scary fire phoenix that hovered right beside the girl. It cried at the white-haired man in warning, but it didn't attack. It actually looked quite afraid of the white-haired man. Interesting. Is this a combination of a phoenix and a fish bird? To be able to do this is quite interesting. The white-haired man finally averted his gaze from Bauer to look at the little red bird, intrigued. Falling Leaf was frozen. She had thought the little red bird on Bauer's shoulder was a useless pet, but the scary presence it now exuded told her that it was actually a deified xenogeniac. The next second, an even scarier thing happened. The white-haired man simply reached out and grabbed the fire phoenix out of the air. The bird's fire vanished, and it didn't even have a chance to resist. It returned to being that little red bird in his hands, and it couldn't fly away. Chapter 24:36 Girls should not fly. The white-haired man looked at the little red bird in his hand. It kept squirming, thrashing its wings as it tried to escape the grasp. He spoke to himself, saying, "You really have phoenix and fishbird genes? And it is still so young. Who could do something like this?" Bauer looked at the white-haired man. She blinked and said, "Are you going to bully a kid and her pet?" When the white-haired man heard Bauer, he turned to her and smiled. Raising his hand, he freed the little red bird. It flapped its wings and quickly hid behind Bauer, too afraid to reveal itself. "What is your name?" the white-haired man asked Bauer. "Bauer, Han Bauer," Bauer answered seriously. Aside from the times when she was with Han Sun and Ji Yin Ran, she was rarely so honest. "Not bad. Say hi to your father for me." The white-haired man nodded to Bauer, then turned to leave. "What is your name?" Bauer asked, looking at the white-haired man's back. "Tai." The white-haired man didn't look back. He kept on walking. After a few steps, though, his body began to disappear into a ripple in space. "What are you doing?" Bauer asked. "Calling in a debt. It's time that I get back something that doesn't belong to them." The white-haired man's voice echoed through the cosmos, drifting from an increasing distance until it vanished entirely. Falling Leaf was left trembling. She had never seen someone use a teleportation skill while still sending back their voice. Even King Bai couldn't do something like that. As Falling Leaf recovered from her shock, someone cried out, calling for aid. "Help!" They turned around, and a girl wearing pink clothing was running through in the middle of the fight. She sprinted toward them, screaming and sobbing. A Duke Xenogenic worker was chasing after her. It had no weapon, and it was reaching for the woman with its bare hands. Based on how she was moving, the woman seemed stronger than the Duke worker. But she also looked terrified, and she ran recklessly without the will or courage to look back. Bauer cocked her head curiously as Ningyu approached. She remembered Ningyu, and no matter how much she tried, she couldn't connect this Ningyu with the powerful person she used to know. "Help me! Bauer, help me!" Ningyu pleaded, running forward like a dog with its tail between its legs. Falling Leaf was about to stop Ningyu, but Bauer hastily told her, "Let him come." Ningyu stumbled clumsily into the ruins of the room, and when she got there, she hid behind Bauer, still shaking. Too scary. Save me, Bauer." "Huh. Little Miss Ningyu, you should be much stronger than that lame Duke. What are you afraid of?" Bauer laughed, looking at Ningyu as if she was eyeing a fun new toy. Tremors still ran through Ningyu's body. Her face looked pale. She really seemed to be rattled. Fighting is wrong. Murder is even more wrong. Plus, I am such a beautiful girl." "Ha!" Bauer couldn't help but laugh. Her eyes smiled like a crescent moon, and she stroked Ningyu's hair. Right. You are so right. Pretty and cute girls like us shouldn't be fighting and killing." "I know, right?" Ningyu frantically nodded her agreement. She still looked to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Falling Leaf didn't agree at all. She swiftly used her dagger to cut the Duke's head off. "What happened? Why is this happening? Does this have something to do with that man?" Falling Leaf looked around. The killing was taking place everywhere, and she didn't seem to know where to look. More creatures were toward them. Falling Leaf warned them loudly to stay back, but they didn't listen to her words, and so she had to fight and cut them down. Han Sun and Miss Mirror were still having a standoff. Neither of them had yet made the first move. "Me or her? You can only pick one." Miss Mirror eyed Han Sun, her grip on the broken sword still tight. "Let's leave here together. This place is so scary. It will be safer if we go someplace with more people." Han Sun smiled. "Safety depends on what kind of partner you have. I don't want to haul a ticking time bomb around with me, not knowing if it will explode at any moment," Miss Mirror said. "Then how about you keep going on ahead by yourself, and I will turn back with the girl. Is that okay?" Han Sun said after a moment of thought. "No. Do you want her to bring harm to my spring rain?" Miss Mirror frowned. "Then I will wait here with her and not go anywhere," Han Sun said. "No. If you cannot do it, then I will do it for you," Miss Mirror said. She swung her sword at the girl in Han Sun's arms. Miss Mirror had become king class, but her will and intelligence were still deified. Her slash appeared like a rainbow, not straight, but mysteriously curved. It made it very difficult to tell where the sword was headed. Han Sen's movements were also difficult to predict, but after a couple of attempts to evade the attack, he was still unable to dodge Miss Mirror's sword. He threw his palm out to intercept the broken sword. He touched its hilt, but not its blade. The broken sword could cut through a requiem tree, so it was far too sharp to counter directly. Han Sen wouldn't use his own weapon to block the blow. Even a deified treasure might be destroyed by the broken sword. But when his palm struck the hilt of the broken sword, a sharp pain seared through his chest. A wave of power sent him flying, and made his ribs groan under the strain. He tasted blood in the back of his mouth. What's going on? Something injured my chest. Is this my own power? Han Sen thought to himself, but Miss Mirror's broken sword came slashing toward him again. Miss Mirror was proving why she had been such a powerful deified elite. Her sword skills far exceeded Han Sen's abilities, and she was still extremely strong. And her sword skills were uncanny. No matter how much Han Sen varied his movement patterns, he couldn't avoid the strike. It was kind of like a falsified sky attack, but this attack lacked causal powers. Pang! Han Sen had to reach out his hand to counter the attack. Like last time, his hand struck the hilt of the broken sword. Another impact thudded into his chest and sent him flying. Miss Mirror followed him like his own shadow. She kept trying to strike that girl that Han Sen held in his arms. Is this your mirror spirit body? Han Sen asked as he retreated. Yes. Even as a king class, I can kill you easily. So don't test my patience, Miss Mirror said warningly. So your mirror spirit body can only return attacks that I deal? That's not very impressive, Han Sen said. Maybe it's not amazing, but it's enough to kill you, Miss Mirror declared. You're willing to kill me? Han Sen couldn't fall back anymore. He wouldn't be able to avoid the next attack, and he couldn't counterattack Miss Mirror or the broken sword. He turned around and used his body to shield the girl from the blade. Don't think that I won't kill you, Miss Mirror said with obvious annoyance, as she stopped her sword. Chapter 2437 Mirror Area. My lady is a princess of the Extreme King, and you are the king's sister. You are the leader of Spring Rain. Are you really going to believe in the truthfulness of this prophecy? Tell me the real reason you want to kill her, Han Sen said coolly as he eyed Miss Mirror. Miss Mirror didn't continue trying to attack him. She looked at Han Sen for a while before saying, prophecies can have very real power. Not many elites can actually predict the future, but there are some. Most notably, the very high are very skilled at prophecy. They are able to predict events in a similar manner to how the pictures on that screen seem to function. But that isn't the real reason that you want to kill her, Han Sen said, shaking his head. Miss Mirror didn't deny the accusation. Right now her body is weak, so weak that any noble could kill her. But the powers that she displayed earlier were very strong. Even Night Wind, a deified elite of the Extreme King, was brought down in a single blow. This strangely fluctuating power reminds me of someone from an old legend. Who? Han Sen raised his eyebrow. Sacred Leader, Miss Mirror said slowly. How is that possible? Sacred Leader led so many powerful elites. If he had a weakness that was so obvious, I'm sure he would have died many times over, Han Sen replied skeptically. If Sacred Leader's body was that weak, he would have had great difficulty keeping himself alive, let alone ruling an empire. He commanded a multitude of people with incredible power. Such people would have discovered his weakness quite easily. There was no way Sacred Leader could have led Sacred for so long with such a blatant flaw. Of course, it is only a legend. Although Sacred Leader's body was sometimes weak, he was always wearing a magical set of armor. Even those closest to Sacred Leader never saw his face. Plus, he was extremely skilled with the powers of time and space. Ambushing or trapping him would have been impossible. I don't know exactly what it means, but this girl's power is very abnormal. Maybe she is somehow connected with Sacred Leader. Even if they aren't related, I must still take the precaution of killing her. I am not risking my life for her. Miss Mirror looked at Han Sen and went on to say, you should leave now, as this is your last chance. If you try to stop me, I will kill you. I won't let you escape if you oppose me here. Han Sen had questions he needed to ask the girl, many of which he desperately wanted to know the answers to. He didn't want her to die just yet. I am sorry, but I'd like for her to live, Han-sun murmured quietly. Miss Mirror said nothing. She merely slashed towards Han-sun, letting her actions speak for her. She had made a decision, and if Han-sun was going to stop her from killing the girl, she would no longer try to avoid injuring him. Based on the power in Miss Mirror's attack, it seemed that she was no longer playing around. And Han-sun knew it. He took this threat seriously. His purple eye butterfly kept spinning, analyzing Miss Mirror's sword skill. He could use his Dongxian area to stop Miss Mirror's area and power, but that skill was part of his identity as dollar. If Han-sun used it in this situation, then his identity would be exposed. He didn't want to have to do that unless it was absolutely necessary. Miss Mirror's sword skills were strangely unpredictable. They were not causal sword skills, but they were still hard to dodge. As he saw Miss Mirror coming, Han-sun moved again to avoid her blade. Han-sun's movement was fast. He was faster than Miss Mirror, but somehow, the broken sword still hit him and sliced into his arm. Han-sun had the undying original Water King body, so even if his body was cut open, he could heal immediately. Normal injuries wouldn't really hurt him. When he took a strike from that broken sword, however, his original Water King body wasn't healing. It looks like this broken sword might have been quite the infamous weapon. Even the original Water King body cannot stand against it. You better think about how much you really want to stop me. The next hit won't land on your arm, Miss Mirror promised, and then, she swung her sword. The sword arced like a rainbow, seeming to disappear mid-swing, like usual. I understand your sword skills. Han-sun moved, and Miss Mirror's attack hit nothing. Miss Mirror froze. She swung her sword at Han-sun again. Many sword rainbows came down. But Han-sun was like a butterfly. He fluttered back and forth, weaving between the sword rainbows. He was still holding the girl though, and so he couldn't fight back. But he dodged each and every one of Miss Mirror's attacks. This must be a combination of your mirror area and your sword skills. Sword skills that go across the mirror world can't really be dodged. It flips the world, allowing an attack to travel through space that shouldn't exist. That keeps your opponents from discerning where a sword is coming from, because they can't follow the blade along its path. It is a very powerful move, but it is useless against someone like me, Han-sun said, continuing to speak calmly as he dodged Miss Mirror's attacks. Miss Mirror finally forced herself to accept that Han-sun could see through her mirror sword skills. Continuing to attack would be pointless, so she lowered the sword. Can we actually talk now? Han-sun didn't want to fight with Miss Mirror. Doing that would lead them right into the prophesied scenario. Miss Mirror gently laughed. You think you have escaped my mirror sword skills? Have I not? Han-sun asked. If you insist on getting in my way, I will let you see the real mirror area, Miss Mirror said, before lifting the sword in her hand again. Han-sun knew Miss Mirror was an annoyingly powerful woman, so he hadn't let his guard down when she stopped attacking. I will use this sword to blind your left eye. Miss Mirror swung with the broken sword, but this time, no sword rainbows appeared, twisting sinuously through space itself. This power slammed into Han-sun with no warning. Pain shot through Han-sun's left eye like it had been stabbed by a needle. Blood squirted from it, then the eyeball exploded. Han-sun didn't even see how she had managed to get his eye. This attack will break your right eye, Miss Mirror said simply. Then she slashed again with her broken sword. Han-sun focused, pushing his purple eye butterfly to the max. He still couldn't identify the power that was pushing the broken sword. A ripping sensation came from his right eye, as if it had been cut by a blade as well. It exploded like the left eye, and blood poured from the socket. Because of the broken sword's weird power, his eyes kept bleeding. The bleeding wasn't going to stop, and his blood wouldn't crystallize either. Let go of that girl, or my next strike will kill you, Miss Mirror said in a hard tone. Han-sun was now blind, but that didn't affect what he could feel. He still looked incredibly calm as he said, I should have known this was the real mirror area. My eyes reflected you and your sword, so you could break my eyes using your mirror. Now that my eyes are destroyed, what else will reflect you and your sword? How are you going to kill me? Miss Mirror sighed. You are too young. You think that's all my mirror area can do? After that, Miss Mirror raised her hand, and an old mirror appeared next to her. It was as tall as she was. That old mirror was pointed at Han Sen, and it reflected Han Sen's image. Miss Mirror thrust her blade toward the mirror. The broken sword shoved through the mirror, but the mirror wasn't broken. Han Sen felt a surge of pain in his chest, and a bloody hole appeared not far from his sternum. What a powerful mirror area. Thank you for not killing me, my lady. Han Sen knew this sword Miss Mirror wielded could have penetrated his heart or sliced his head off. Chapter 24:38 Jadeskin Area. I am giving you one last chance, Miss Mirror said, her voice as harsh as a winter wind. She didn't want to kill Han Senator after all. He was the master of the Mirror Spirit Eye Ring. Killing him would deal a lot of damage to the Mirror Spirit Eye Ring, which would affect Miss Mirror herself very severely. But although she really didn't want to risk damaging the ring, she wanted to kill Lady Wanna even more. If Han Sen refused to walk away, then she needed to beat Han Sen badly enough that he was no longer in any condition to protect the girl. If the last picture is true, will it be me and Han Sen in front of that statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes? Miss Mirror wondered. My lady, you overestimate your mirror area's power. Twin trails of blood streaked over Han Sen's cheeks as he held Lady Wanner. He looked very calm. Right. Miss Mirror snapped, looking a bit angry. She had never been this patient with anyone before. If another person had tested her temper like this, even if they were deified, she would have struck them down. She kept enduring Han Sen's stubbornness and rudeness, but he obviously didn't appreciate that she was going easy on him. It was very frustrating for Miss Mirror. She used her sword to slash at the mirror. Han Sen moved the moment Miss Mirror swung the broken sword. Her broken sword entered the mirror, but it couldn't hurt Han Sen this time. Your mirror area can assault my shadow within the mirror you create. Since that shadow is linked to my real body, you can hurt me. But that all depends on you being able to touch my shadow. My shadow in the mirror, however, moves with me. I can control it, allowing it to dodge your broken sword, Han Sen said. You are smart. You have learned much about my mirror area in such a short amount of time. Miss Mirror complimented him. Her face remained impassive. But even if you do know that, so what? The mirror world is the opposite of our world. You can control your shadow, but it won't move as naturally as your own body, because every move you make in this world will be reversed in the mirror. And on top of that, you have been blinded. You cannot see your shadow in the mirror. So how do you expect that you will be able to dodge me? Try to attack me again, and you will see for yourself how well I can still dodge. Han Sen's composed expression hadn't changed. Clearly, Miss Mirror wasn't fond of Han Sen's attitude. She slashed her sword in the direction of the mirror with one of her rainbows. The power of the attack headed for Han Sen's shadow in the mirror. Han Sen needed to control his movement, guiding his shadow around the incoming attack. Han Sen's shadow responded instantly to his every movement, but the reversal of the mirror made it very difficult to control. Normal people use mirrors to do their makeup or brush their hair. When performing a task that required a person to make extremely precise movements, people who weren't very experienced with working in mirrors would often make mistakes. Han Sen wasn't doing anything as simple as brushing his hair, though. He was using a mirror to fight for his life. Han Sen had to control his reflection to avoid Miss Mirror's scary attacks. It would be a difficult task at the best of times, and doing so while blinded and injured would be nearly impossible. But Miss Mirror, despite running her sword skills at full power, was failing to inflict any more damage on Han Sen's reflection. She couldn't land a single strike. How is he doing this? Miss Mirror wondered, her shock etched deep into her face. She knew how hard this had to be, especially since Han Sen had only just become a king. She would never have expected that Han Sen would be able to neutralize her sword skills. After all, she had the experience of a deified. She wasn't some ordinary king-class enemy to him. Now Han Sen could fight her face to face, and he could control the shadow in the mirror with unbelievable proficiency. She missed each and every attack. Through all of this, though, the most amazing thing was that Han Sen was blind. It was hard to imagine how strong his other senses must be to accomplish a feat such as this. Miss Mirror couldn't hurt his reflection, and so her sword stopped moving. My lady, It looks like you cannot hurt me, Han Sun said. Miss Mirror was no longer angry. She had underestimated Han Sun, who was a king. She never thought Han Sun would become an actual threat to her. But now, Han Sun's performance had revealed him as just that, an enemy who could rival her power. He wasn't just some random king she could slay on a whim. You are very strong. A leftover of the crystallizers, is this capable? That is incredibly rare. If it was possible to avoid being your enemy, I would choose to do so, Miss Mirror said, looking at Han Sun with newfound respect. I don't want to be your enemy either. Why don't we re-establish our bonds of cooperation and work to rid ourselves of the red-eye plague? Han Sun smiled. We will, of course. But she must die first, Miss Mirror said. The muscles in her jaw tightened, and a weird light shimmered. A scary mirror area appeared. Han Sun immediately realized he was now trapped in a mirror maze. Mirrors appeared everywhere he looked. Even the ground and the sky above were just mirror images. Han Sun's reflection was in every mirror, as if thousands of Han Suns were there. The mirrors reflected each other, creating reflections of Han Sun that stretched back into infinity. Han Sun's face changed. Since there were so many reflections, Miss Mirror could strike him with far greater ease now. Han Sun needed to stop her from hitting any one of those reflections. Defending himself had become a much more difficult task now, and it would be even harder to break the old mirrors now too. He didn't know if those old mirrors could be broken, but even if they could break, the mirrors would only shatter and create countless more reflections in the shards. Han Sun would be in even more danger then. Still confident that you can dodge my attacks? Miss Mirror asked as she hung in the center of the mirror area. Let's give it a try. Maybe I can make it work. Han Sun shrugged. You are so stubborn, Miss Mirror grunted. With a swing of the broken sword, sword rainbows came to life and went flying at Han Sun through the mirrors. There were too many reflections in the mirrors, and Miss Mirror continued to attack without pause or hesitation. Countless reflections would be involved in every single evasion that was required. Han Sun's heart leaped. He summoned Jade Skin and channeled as much power into it as he could. His body became icy jade. His mind opened, and his jade skin area appeared. His expression focused. Han Sun jumped, and all of his reflections avoided the incoming sword strike. At the same time, his jade skin area covered all of the old mirrors. Frost spread over the surface of every single mirror. That's useless. Your reflections in the ice are susceptible to my strikes, so I can still use them to kill you. Miss Mirror slashed towards one of the frozen-over mirrors. The ice won't work? It looks like this is it then. Han Sun sighed. Han Sun withdrew his jade skin area, pulling it all back into his body. Miss Mirror's sword came for one of Han Sun's reflections again, but this time, Han Sun didn't dodge. Dong! 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 Miss Mirror's sword struck all of Han Sun's reflections, but Han Sun just stood where he was. He wasn't bleeding, and not a single wound appeared across his body. It was like he was a jade statue, resolute and still. Not even dust will tarnish my jade skin, Miss Mirror. My body is my body. It is mine alone, and nothing in this world will change that. Even if you break all my reflections, you cannot hurt me. Han Sun held Lady Wanner while he spoke, his voice frosty. Chapter 2439 Statue. With 1,000 hands and eyes, Miss Mirror's rainbow powers kept swinging. They broke many of the reflections in the mirrors, but Han Sun's body remained completely undamaged. My lady, if you still had a deified body, it is safe to say that my jade skin wouldn't be able to endure your powerful sword strikes. But now, you aren't too different from me. You are a first-tier king-class opponent. Unless you strike me with the broken sword, hitting my reflections isn't going to hurt me, Han Sun said. So what? It's actually quite relieving that I don't have to worry about striking you. I will just hit the woman instead. Even if you hide her behind you, you cannot protect her shadow from me. Miss Mirror pronounced as she raised her broken sword again. My lady, you must have heard what I just said, Han Sun said, as he suddenly looked at Miss Mirror. What? Miss Mirror asked. We are the same level as kings. Han Sun raised his fists. The ice jade around his fists became a godlight and flashed toward Miss Mirror. Miss Mirror's heart jumped, and an old mirror formed in front of her. She wanted to reflect the jade skin godlight back on its wielder. But the godlight wasn't a simple attack power. It was a power for sealing. The icy light suddenly wrapped a binding seal around Miss Mirror and the old mirror, resolving into the shape of a giant ice cube. Miss Mirror, I'm going on ahead. If I can break the red eye power, I will come back for you. Han Sun looked at Miss Mirror's broken sword, but he decided not to take it with him. He simply resettled his arms a little more comfortably around Wanner and headed back into the broken city. Even if the prophecy was true, it would be fulfilled by him and the girl now. Their current situation still aligned with the sixth picture of the mural they had discovered. But the broken city in front of them had yet to be cleared. The place was covered in broken stone and debris, and since Night Wind was no longer there to make a path for them, Han Sun had to do it. While carrying the girl, he broke the stones himself. He didn't have substance chains like Night Wind, so he was unable to clear a wide area. Instead, he broke a path just wide enough for him to slip through while still carrying the girl. He tried to travel as fast as he could. Han Sun felt as if the red eye power wasn't affecting him as much, which might or might not have been because his eyes were broken. He still felt the urge to move in a certain direction, but it wasn't that strong. He wasn't sure what sort of weapon that broken sword had been, but Han Sun's injured eyes weren't healing with Jadeskin's power. But Han Sun cared little about that. It didn't matter to him if he had eyes right now. He could take the time to heal when he got out of there. Han Sun hadn't been gone for long with the ice-sealing Miss Mirror made a groaning noise. Cracks appeared across its surface, and a second later, the ice cube shattered. Miss Mirror was free. Miss Mirror looked in the direction that Han Sun had escaped. Her expression was conflicted, but a while later she sighed. I hope he can break the red eye curse. Miss Mirror had realized something, and although she didn't want to think about it, she knew she had to. Unless she became deified again, it wouldn't be possible for her to defeat Han Sun at his current level. And so, if Han Sun couldn't find and destroy the source of the red eye curse, all was lost. Perhaps the prophecy would come true, too, and one of them would die. We might be the same level, but I can't compete with you. I hope when you are deified, you will have the courage to face me in the same way. Miss Mirror sat on a rock near the entrance to the cave leading into the city. She cast a Geno art to block the addiction-like draw of the red eye power, and she sat there awaiting Han Sun's result. Han Sun carried Lady Wanner forward, breaking rocks as he went. He didn't encounter anything weird this time. But after 2 hours of travel, the rocks in front of him were becoming easier to move. When Han Sun moved the next pile of rubble out of his way, he realized that there was open air behind it. Han Sun stood before the entrance to a hall, and in that hall, there was a statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. It looked exactly the same as the one they had seen previously, but this statue was 1,000 meters tall, far bigger than the one he had seen before. The moment Han Sun entered the hall, he could feel the statue staring at him. Han Sun's blinded eyes suddenly burned. The damage in his eyes began to repair itself, and in seconds, and he was able to see again. Even with no mirror, Han Sun could feel that his eyes were shining with red light. The 4 pupils in his eyes were now like 4 red suns. That feeling of addiction had suddenly grown by orders of magnitude. Han Sun felt like a moth drawn to a flame. He wanted nothing more than to go to that statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. Han Sun's will was really strong, but even he was wavering under the draw of the statue. It was like the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes was his final home. He wanted so badly to go into it. Come, come! A demonic voice whispered from the statue. It was beckoning him over. Although Han Sun tried to control his will, his feet began stepping forward of their own volition. The call couldn't go unheeded, it seemed. He was slowly walking towards the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. Boom! Without hesitation, Han Sun deployed his super god spirit body. A glowing light spread in his eyes. It smothered the red and made his entire eyes turn white. When Han Sun last used his super god spirit body, he had been interrupted by Wanner before it could remove the red color from his eyes. But now that he had unleashed it, the red eyes were gone. The white light burned across Han Sun like a cleansing flame. Han Sun's body hung in the air, white and godlike. He looked down on that giant statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. There were red eyes on one of the statue's pairs of hands, and those hands moved with Han Sen's body. That eye on the statue was like a demon, tracing Han Sen's movements. But under the influence of his super god spirit mode, the power of the eyes didn't work on Han Senator Han Sun, gathered up his power to use super spank. He wanted to see if he could break the demon-looking eye upon the statue, but before Han Sun struck, he felt his super god spirit body's power begin to fade. It suddenly disappeared and returned to his Geno core. What is this? Han Sun was shocked. The power had begun to fade from his back, and that was where Lady Wanner was. The super god spirit body's power disappeared. The power of the statue landed on Han Sun, and it suddenly turned his eyes back into those red ones. Once more, Han Sun felt like a moth drawn to a flame. It was stronger than last time too. His body was pulled uncontrollably toward the statue. This is bad. Now that Wanner has no power, why would my super god spirit body be affected by her? Han Sun was in shock. Chapter 2440 Effect Wanner was still in her comatose state, but Han Sun tossed her body away from him. She landed against the ground some distance away, but luckily, Han Sun had used some of his power to cushion her landing. Instead of slamming into the ground like a bag of rocks, Wanner slid smoothly through the air and landed softly, almost silently on the ground. Han Sun wanted to see if having some distance between himself and Wanner would allow him to fully activate and maintain his super god spirit body. After tossing Wanner aside, Han Sun redeployed his super god spirit body. White light surrounded him once again, glowing from his hair and eyes. His red eyes vanished in a sea of white, just like they had on his previous attempt. But this time, Han Sun managed to keep his super god spirit body going, and his power didn't fade. Was Wanner really causing my power to disappear? What's going on? How is it possible for her to affect my super god spirit body? Han Sun looked at Wanner with shock. He noticed that her own body was glowing with gold light. Her eyes and hair were turning gold. Han Sun didn't have time to worry about that at the moment though. He just focused on using super spank. He threw his fist toward the eye on the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes to see if he could break it. But the moment Han Sun got close, a weird glow rose around the statue. The statue seemed to be gathering up a substance chain of red light. And then the light lashed out at Senator Han Sen's super god spirit body, ignored blood light coming for him. The blood light went straight through him like he didn't even exist. Like he was some sort of phantom. But Han Sun punched the statue's eye, releasing an explosion of force. The shockwave shoved Han Sen's body back, but the super spank strike was unable to destroy the eye. This is harder than that weird deify bug. Even the thought made Han Sun feel a cold dread. Part of him had expected this result though. The confirmation simply disappointed him. He couldn't break the statue. That meant he couldn't unlock the secrets of the red eye power. But it also wouldn't affect him, because he had the super god spirit body. But if anyone else was infected with the red eye condition, there was nothing he could do. Han Sun turned around and began walking away. He needed to leave the broken city, first and foremost. But then the statue suddenly moved. Its enormous form suddenly stood fully erect, and it looked down on Han Sun with abject hatred. The entire hall shook as the statue rose to its full height. It is alive! Han Sun wasn't surprised. He jumped forward and tried to reach Wanner, but he then saw Wanner's body lift itself off the ground. Her hair and eyes had turned blonde, and she now looked exactly as she had appeared when Han Sun first saw her. Her eyes were open, but they were glazed and unfocused. The statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes stepped forward, sending one of its demon-like hands down to slap Han Senator. It paused above him, though, and it began to shine. The blonde-haired Wanner teleported in front of the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes, hovering in the air directly in front of its face. She waved her hand and cut its head off. Boom! The giant stone head fell onto the floor of the hall, creating a good-sized crater, where it slammed into the floor. Han Sun was frozen. Wanner had such a weak body, but after she turned golden, her power became truly frightening. Its magnitude was difficult to believe. This was completely different from what the sixth image of the mural had depicted too. The sixth picture showed one person on the floor, and another person praying to the complete statue. But while the head had been cut off, the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes did not fall. Its body began to writhe, and all of its 1,000 arms were moving. The red eye in each of its hands began to glow, and that hellish glow covered the hall from one end to the other. Countless red substance chains emerged and slithered toward Wanner's body. Wanner's power was incredible, but her body was solid, and could therefore be injured. She didn't have the invincible features of Han Sen's super god spirit body. Countless substance chains tangled around Wanner's body, and a cruel grin suddenly played across the mouth of the statue head on the floor. It flew up and opened its mouth, trying to consume Wanner. Han Sen's heart leaped. He stepped forward to help Wanner, but the golden light coming from Wanner's body intensified, and the rest of the chains suddenly melted. She raised a single hand and pressed it against the statue's head. And then, the statue's head exploded like fireworks. The head was shattered, but the statue wasn't dead. It seemed to be quite shocked, though. It turned its giant body around to run away. Wanner's blonde-haired form flashed, and she reappeared beside the statue. She reached out and planted her hands firmly on the statue's body. Pang! The whole statue exploded. The giant body was reduced to a heap of rubble, and its arms lay scattered about. Too strong. Han Sen couldn't help but compliment her display of power. Strength like that could destroy almost anything. Even that powerful statue had been killed in scant moments. Most of the arms that fell to the floor of the hall were now broken, and the eyes that they held had been destroyed. Even those that hadn't been outright destroyed were bleeding profusely. They would die soon. The arms writhed on the floor in a sickening fashion like deadly snakes. But one broken eyeball did shoot away from its attendant hand. It became a blood light as it tried to escape the hall. Han Sen stood next to the exit of the hall, and he watched that blood eye come. He used super spank to smack it. There was a loud squelching noise as he smacked it, and the jelly of the eyeball sprayed out as the thing fell to the floor. When the eyeball ruptured, the writhing pieces of the statue all stopped. It was like a heap of rubble now and nothing more. Mutant deified xenogenic hunted. Blood Eye Evil God. Mutant xenogenic gene found. Obtain Blood Eye Evil God Beast Soul. When Han Sen heard the announcement, he was shocked. He hadn't even realized what he was about to do when he struck the eyeball. He just didn't want it to escape. He hadn't thought there'd be a reward, especially a reward on such a scale. Before Han Sen had time to examine the Blood Eye Evil God's Beast Soul, the blonde-haired Wanner teleported over to him. Her golden eyes looked in Han Sen's direction, but they had so little focus that he couldn't tell if she was actually looking at him. Then Wanner's hand drifted forward to pat Han Sen on the head. This shocked Han Senator. He suddenly realized that when Wanner had grabbed his neck, she had wanted to kill him. But something else had happened instead. As Wanner's hand came from, an overwhelming sense of danger weighed on Han Sen's shoulders. The feeling was so strong it was almost suffocating. Chapter 2441. The screen is gone. Wanner struck too fast for Han Sen to dodge. His fast reflexes moved his head far enough back that she didn't strike him directly, but her fingertips still tore into his face. 3 deep gashes were torn into Han Sen's face. The clefts were so deep that his skull became visible through them. Han Sen was shocked. He was still in his super god spirit body mode, but Wanner's fingers had damaged him anyway. This was the first time something of the sort had ever happened. Luckily, he managed to dodge most of her attack. Otherwise, his entire head would have split open like a cut watermelon. Han Sen instinctually started to return to the sanctuaries. His super god spirit body couldn't block Wanner's power if she chose to attack him again. So he couldn't escape by traditional means if she wanted to fight him. But Wanner didn't attack him again. She stood where she was, unmoving. She looked at the blood on her fingers, which was Han Sen's blood. A little life came back to her eyes, and her golden power began to fade. Do we affect each other? Han Sen thought happily. He gritted his teeth and grabbed Wanner's arm. He examined her. As Wanner's body came closer to Han Sen, her gold color faded much faster. When he saw that Wanner wasn't resisting, Han Sen pulled her into his arms. When their bodies were in physical contact, Wanner's golden power vanished completely. Her eyes looked fully cognizant for the first time. "Good brother, it's so nice to have you here," Wanner mumbled against Han Sen's chest. She was lying forward against him, and she slowly closed her eyes. After she spoke, Wanner's body went soft. Her consciousness drifted away as it had before. Han Sen frowned and looked at the girl in his arms. Her life force was weaker than it had been the previous time, when she was in a coma. Now, her life force was like that of a dying old woman. She no longer had the vitality of a teenage lady. Does this mean that using the golden power costs her the strength of her life force? Han Sen looked at the lady thoughtfully, as a variety of emotions shifted across her expression. This girl was the only person Han Sen had ever encountered who could threaten him in his super god spirit body mode. It might have been a good idea to get rid of her, but there were so many unknowns about the girl. A lot of questions had been raised by her existence, and she did seem to harbor some sort of connection to Han Senator. He really needed to figure out what was going on here. As long as she is next to me, she can't make use of that scary power. So, I suppose I don't have to be too afraid. I need to figure out what she is before I do anything drastic. Han Sen sighed, set the girl down, and then looked across the hall. The hall had only been home to the statue, and Han Sen looked around for a while, but he didn't find anything useful there. And the materials that composed the hall were too tough to be broken through, so Han Sen couldn't search any further. Han Sen did find a piece of red crystal that was around the size of his hand, though. It was inside the remains of the red eyeball. He put it in his pocket, then went back the way he had come. Now that the statue has been destroyed, I wonder if the red eye condition is still in effect. Han Sen went back the way he had come to take a look. But when he reached the place that he had left Miss Mirror, he didn't see her there. Did she go back to camp? That really isn't her style. Han Sen frowned, then began walking a little faster. Even if the red eye power infecting Miss Mirror had vanished, she wouldn't simply go home. She would have stayed where she was and waited for Han Sen to return, so she could grill him thoroughly over what had happened. Plus, the pieces of the shattered tree egg were still lying around. If Miss Mirror had decided to leave, she would have at least taken the pieces of the tree egg with her. They were a valuable treasure. It's good that she is gone then. That means all of these tree egg shards are mine. Han Sen picked up a piece and started to put it away. As he did, he noticed how nice the chunk of egg smelled, but there didn't seem to be any life force within the pieces of egg. And furthermore, there was no semblance of power. This definitely wasn't what Han Sen had expected. No wonder Miss Mirror left these behind. They're already useless. Did Wano absorb the powers of the tree egg while she was inside it? Han Sen guessed. He couldn't think of any other explanations. Han Sen kept walking back the way he had come. He didn't encounter any more trouble. Wano was still in her coma, and her body was so weak that it looked like the final tether of her life would break at any second. Han Sen didn't know why the girl had been reduced to such a condition. If this continued, she wouldn't last long. Strangely, though, Han Sen found no evidence of the wall of pictures on his return trip. The wall seemed to have just vanished into thin air, without a trace. Han Sen continued walking back toward camp, and when the first statue came into view, he froze. Miss Mirror was lying in front of the statue, and a woman was kneeling beside her. The woman was praying to the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. It was one of the 4 kings. It was Red Cloud. The scene before him was the same as the 6th picture depicted on the screen's mural. It gave Han Sen a chill. What is going on? Han Sen was confused. He looked at Red Cloud and Miss Mirror, unsure what was happening. Miss Mirror's presence was still there. She wasn't dead, but she seemed to be badly wounded as she lay on the ground. She obviously wasn't doing well. Red Cloud knelt before the statue like a sincere believer. Her eyes were closed and her hands were folded as she prayed. No way. Red Cloud never saw the statue. And didn't Miss Mirror tell her to watch over the base? Why is she here? Did the red eye power become contagious? That means Bauer and Ningyu are in danger. Anxiety grew in the pit of Han Sen's stomach, and he started jogging forward. Before Han Sen reached the statue, Red Cloud opened her eyes. Her eyes were the color of blood, and they contained 2 pupils each. That was the look people had when they were stricken with the power of the Blood Eye evil god. Upon seeing Han Sun, Red Cloud looked murderous. She picked up the broken sword, but instead of striking Han Sun, she turned and thrust the broken blade into Miss Mirror's chest. Han Sun's heart jumped, and he used his jade skin area to freeze Red Cloud. Red Cloud was only king class, so she was unable to defeat Han's Senator. The red-eye powers were running through her too strongly for her to know what she was doing. She couldn't block Han Sen's power, and so she ended up frozen. Han Sun walked up to Miss Mirror. He crouched, looked at her and smiled. "Miss Mirror, why are you lying around at a time like this? Use your sword to break the statue," Miss Mirror said quietly through gritted teeth. Her eyes were still a deep red. Han Sun could feel that the statue still had that red-eye power, but it wasn't as strong as the statue Wanner had destroyed earlier. It didn't make him want to run deep into the city. It just wanted him to go to the statue itself. Clearly, although the Blood-Eye Evil God had been killed, this statue still had some of that Blood-Eye Evil God power. Chapter 2442 I Am an Offering. Han Sun pulled the broken sword out of Red Cloud's hand and swung it across the face of the statue. A deep furrow was gouged into the statue's face, and blood started to leak from it. The statue didn't move, however. The statue wasn't as hard as Han Sun had expected, though. After a few more of those strikes, the stone statue's head fell off. The severed neck of the statue gushed blood, but it was just a statue. Where the blood came from, Han Sun had no idea. Strangely, once Han Sun cut off the head of the statue, it didn't behave like the Blood-Eye Evil God had upon being decapitated. Instead of getting stronger or fighting back, it simply died. Han Sun examined the statue again to confirm what he thought he saw. The statue was dying. It dried up like a withered plant. It looked somewhat like a bergamot flower. The stalk and its flowers were dark red. The stone head that had been lopped off was the plant's largest blossom. "It is a plant," Han Sun remarked in surprise. He didn't hear any killing announcement, which made him doubt that the plant was actually a creature. After the flower died, Miss Mirror's red eyes started to fade. It looked like the red-eye powers were finally gone. Miss Mirror, however, was too injured to rejoice. She remained on the ground, unable to rise. Han Sun put an arm around her back and helped her sit up. "What happened? Why is Red Cloud here? Why are you hurt?" Miss Mirror opened her mouth, but struggled to speak. "Something happened back at base camp. We need to go back now." When Han Sun heard that, his face turned gray. Without asking any further questions, he simply picked up Miss Mirror. With her in one arm and Lady Wanner in the other, he sprinted back to the stone fields. When they reached what was left of the base, their hearts sank. What Han Sun saw sickened him. The base had become a ruin and been painted red with the blood and gore of its inhabitants. No one was left alive. Miss Mirror looked terrible. A third of Spring Rain's members had been brought there, and now they were all gone. Furthermore, one of the 4 kings was dead, and Red Cloud had been reduced to a king-class soldier. Miss Mirror had lost so much. Han Sen's face looked awfully glum too. He feared Ning Yu and Bauer might have been killed in the carnage. "Dad!" Han Sun turned to begin searching through the rubble of the ruin, but all of a sudden, Bauer emerged over the top of one heap. It was like a mountaintop. She jumped onto Han Sen's chest and wrapped her small arms tightly around his neck. Bauer was okay, and as she clung to his neck, Ning Yu and Falling Leaf came over the rubble too. Han Sun was so overjoyed that he dropped Miss Mirror to wrap his arms around Bauer. Arg! Miss Mirror was too injured to catch herself, and she hit the ground hard. She coughed up some blood and looked rather angered at being suddenly dropped. "Miss Mirror!" Falling Leaf ran over to pick Miss Mirror up. She imbued her superior with some of her healing powers. "Don't bother, I am too injured for that. I won't heal quickly regardless, so just tell me what happened," Miss Mirror said abruptly, wiping some of the blood from her mouth. Falling Leaf told her everything that had transpired, but for some reason, she left out the part with the white-haired man and the conversation he had shared with Bauer. She also left out the bit regarding the little bird becoming a fiery phoenix. She only said that, after the white-haired man appeared, the people of the base went crazy. They all started killing each other, until none of them remained. But for some reason, a few of them had been unaffected. They were able to escape amidst the chaos. That white-haired man, where did he come from? Miss Mirror asked with a frown. I don't know. When we first saw him, he was already walking around the base and everyone was going insane. Falling Leaf said with a shake of her head. Miss Mirror suddenly had a thought, and she turned her gaze back to Falling Leaf. That stone. Go and see if the stone is still there. We've already looked, Falling Leaf answered. The stone is gone. Miss Mirror sighed and said, Go find Red Cloud and bring her back here. We will have to wait for reinforcements to arrive. Han Sun handed the broken sword to Falling Leaf. She went to the stone fields and brought the frozen Red Cloud back. Although the red eye power had vanished from the rest of them, Red Cloud was still crazed, and her eyes were still clouded with that shade of red. After she was released, she again tried to attack everyone around. Han Sun had to freeze her once more. When the reinforcements came, he was going to let them deal with it. As for Miss Mirror, Han Sun knew why she had been injured so badly. Han Sun had taken too long, and Miss Mirror had been reaching the limits of her ability to withstand the red eye power. Then the feelings of addiction had suddenly vanished. Miss Mirror thought Han Sun had sorted out the red eye problem, and so she felt relieved. But just as she was starting to relax, that addicted feeling washed over her again. And this time it was a few hundred times stronger. The attraction drew Miss Mirror back toward the original statue, and Miss Mirror could no longer resist it. Miss Mirror's mind was still quite clear, but her will was no longer strong enough to control the urge. When she approached the statue, she noticed that Red Cloud had come there too. Miss Mirror was thrilled for a moment, as she thought Red Cloud might be able to use the broken sword to break the statue. But Red Cloud was crazy, and she attacked Miss Mirror as soon as she saw her. Miss Mirror couldn't control her own body well enough to fight Red Cloud, and so Red Cloud beat her to the brink of death. Miss Mirror had been left lying on the ground, struggling to remain conscious. What happened next chilled Miss Mirror's blood though. Red Cloud bowed before the statue and began praying. From what Miss Mirror could understand, Red Cloud wanted to use her as some sort of offering. Han Sun had come in time, thank God. If he hadn't, Miss Mirror would have been killed. Han Sun thought this was very suspicious too. He didn't fully understand what was going on. Han Sun kept Wanner close. If she was any distance at all from Han Sun, her eyes and hair would start to turn gold. The further away from him she was, the faster she would turn. Han Sun experimented with it a little. Wanner couldn't be 10 meters away from him. Otherwise, even in her calm-like state, her hair would turn gold. And when Wanner was within 10 meters of Han Sun, his ability to use his super god spirit power was greatly diminished. The power would begin to fade as soon as he summoned it. The closer to Wanner he was, the faster it faded. Clearly, the two of them had a dramatic effect on each other. Luckily though, the effect only limited Han Sen's super god spirit body. His other powers remained intact. Han Sen asked Miss Mirror not to say anything about Wanner. Han Sen didn't think Miss Mirror would agree to his request, so it was a surprise for him when she actually assented. She did, however, have a condition of her own regarding the secret. What? You want me to be an offering? Han Sun looked at Miss Mirror with wide eyes. Chapter 2443 Choices. As far as the Extreme King are concerned, I brought you here to dig up the ruin of a god's battleground. By doing so, I wanted you to fade from the vision of the royal children, Miss Mirror said calmly. She was reclining on the bed where they had placed her. This is the only reason your pretense of being Prince 16 has lasted this long. But now, this catastrophe with the statues has killed all my people and left you alive. I don't think I will be able to buy you a lot of time. My brother will throw all his resources into investigating you, and you have nowhere to turn. The only thing we can do to keep you alive is to perform a sacrifice. Enter the holy temple to become a devotee. Once you gain the blessing of the Extreme King, your survival will be ensured. I'm going to the holy temple? What does that mean exactly? Han Sun frowned. The holy temple is where the Extreme King makes sacrifices to their god. Every generation must have a sacrifice king. They offer themselves to the god and become a devotee. They serve the god inside the holy temple forever. After pausing, Miss Mirror said, only someone with the blood of the Extreme King can earn the blessing of the god. Therefore, a crystallizer shouldn't be capable of becoming a devotee. If you can though, that will prove you really are Prince 16. At that point, no one will be able to dispel your lie. Even if someone was suspicious, not even King Bai could randomly waltz in and do whatever he pleased. No one would be able to investigate you. So I'd be practically sentenced to life in jail? Han Sen frowned. Which would you prefer, incarceration or death? Even if you left now, where would you go? Do you really think Isha or Kong Fei can protect you? Let me tell you this now. This universe is big. But if it is confirmed that you killed Prince 16, there is nowhere you can go to escape the wrath that will be set upon you. In order to survive, you would have to be stronger than the leagues of deifieds that belong to the Extreme King. And I will be one of them, Miss Mirror said emotionlessly. Even if I want to go to the Extreme King's holy temple, I don't have the blood of the Extreme King. How would I even gain the approval of this god? Han Sen said. It should be possible with the help of my mirror spirit eye ring. Plus, you do have the original Water King body that you got from Bai Yi. Getting the god's approval shouldn't be too difficult. Miss Mirror paused and said. Furthermore, going to the holy temple isn't entirely like being sent to jail. While you may not be able to exit the temple, you can still visit the core area. With the resources you earn in the core area, you can definitely become half deified. Miss Mirror then hesitated. After a while she went on to say, also there are benefits to becoming a devotee. Although you can never leave the holy temple, you will have the opportunity to bathe in the temple's god light. Your genes will be strengthened, and you will have an easier time becoming deified. Is this my only chance of surviving? Han Sen asked quietly. Unless you want a universe-wide APB issued by the Extreme King, yes. This is pretty much the only option. Once you become a devotee, the other royal children won't be hostile to you. And so you'll have less trouble, Miss Mirror said. Even if I wanted to try entering the temple, what are they going to do? Han Sen pointed at Bauer and the unconscious Wanner, who were a little further away. The holy temple isn't a place just anyone can go. Even the royal children must meet certain qualifications before they can become devotees. I can help you get qualified, but in regards to them, they will have to stay on planet Water Zone. After pausing, Miss Mirror said, the best thing for them is to disappear. Otherwise, they may face scrutiny and fall under investigation themselves. Through them, things could unravel. Of course, if you insist on them staying, I can think of a way or two to help them. When Han Sen heard this, he frowned. Bauer and Ningyu could go back to Planet Eclipse. They had the little red bird to protect them after all. But there was no way that Wanner could leave Han Senator if she woke up. She'd become a blonde time bomb. Wanner's life force was super weak right now. If she went on a rampage again, she would die. Han Sen wanted to ask her many things, so he needed her alive until he could talk to her. Let me think about it. Han Sen knew Miss Mirror would continue trying to convince him, so he continued on to say, do you think the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes in Do God City, and that prophetic screen, are connected to the missing rock we first dug up? Han Sen had already gotten the full scoop on the white-haired man from Bauer and Ningyu, but Bauer claimed she didn't know who he was. I don't know. Everything in Do God City is a mystery, and everything we find seems to tie back to yet another myth. My brother will probably send someone else here to continue excavation efforts. I believe answers will one day come, Miss Mirror said. Han Sen went silent. As a king, he was simply too weak. If he became deified, then he'd be qualified to fully explore Do God City. It was a very scary place, and he was just too weak to be there in his current state. Make a decision soon. You are running out of time, Miss Mirror said. Then she stopped talking. She was trying to convince Han Sen, not because Han Sen had the mirror spirit ring, but because he had selected to let her live after their fight in the cave. He had the chance to kill her, but he showed her mercy. And on top of that, he saved her from Red Cloud. Otherwise, she never would have done all this for Han Senator, helping Han Sen enter the holy temple, as a devotee would break basically every law that her people had. Plus, she was the investigator king, Bai had specifically chosen to examine Han Sr. Thanks. Han Sen walked over to Wanner. He looked down at the girl, wondering what he should do with her. Going to the Holy Temple was clearly the safest choice, but that meant he would be giving up on the girl's secrets. Maybe Wanna would wake up before backup arrived? Wanna seemed too weak for that though. Han Sun tried many different tricks and powers to reinforce her life force, or to get her to wake up, but nothing seemed to work. Han Sun didn't dare use more than a trickle of his power. He didn't want to accidentally kill Wanna. Her body was too weak, so using any significant force on her could be deadly. Ugh, this is giving me a headache. If I don't enter the Holy Temple, I'll have to go on the run. Then it won't just be the Extreme King after me. Any race related to the Extreme King, or seeking their favor, will be hunting me. Escaping on my own will be way too hard. Han Sun thought with a frown. If Han Sun escaped, he wouldn't just be affecting himself. It would affect the lives of his friends on planet Eclipse, and it might even blow back on Isha. If I was to leave, would you help me? Han Sun looked at Miss Mirror. I am an Extreme King, Miss Mirror said icily. Han Sun laughed and asked, if I left now, would it affect Isha? That is a question you should ask Isha. It would be her decision. Miss Mirror's eyes flicked down. She seemed to know Han Sun's true decision. Chapter 2444 Universal APB. Han Sun asked Miss Mirror to contact Isha. He wouldn't use his own phone because, if he decided to run, all of his conversations after this day would be thoroughly examined. Han Sun explained his situation to Isha completely, and Isha listened intently. She didn't say a word until Han Sun finished telling her the entire story. When Isha spoke, all she said were 4 words. Go to Sky Palace. Isha then immediately hung up. With that, Han Sun was able to make up his mind. He handed the phone back to Miss Mirror, smiled, and said, Thank you for taking care of me all this time, my lady. I hope we can meet again someday. I'm afraid that won't be possible, but if you die, I will light a candle in your honor, Miss Mirror said emotionlessly. If my death earns a lit candle from you, I will consider myself eternally blessed, Han Sun said. He looked at Miss Mirror and said, I actually still have one more request to make. I was hoping that my lady would take care of my blood, Kiran. If you are willing to, you can use it for yourself. I will remember the kindness you have done me. That blood Kiran is quite an angry beast. I don't think it will follow the commands if another, Miss Mirror said. Controlling it isn't difficult. You just need to use this item to find him, and then he will listen to you. Han Sun brought something out for Miss Mirror. I guess I won't refuse the service of a half-deified. Miss Mirror accepted the item, looked at Han Sun and asked, You really have made the decision to flee? You need to think about this carefully. Even if Sky Palace was willing to defy the Extreme King and take you in, your journey there would be a hellish one. You might not even get there alive. This is my life. I could go to the Holy Temple and survive, but I would spend my life in a prison. For someone like me, that existence would be worse than death. I would rather take a gamble that still leaves me a small chance of freedom, Han Sun said. Although his words weren't entirely honest, Han Sun was explaining one of his primary reasons for refusing to go to the Holy Temple. Then you should go. I hope you survive a few more days. If my guess is correct, reinforcements will arrive here in 40 hours, and I will have to report your situation to my supervisor. Miss Mirror didn't pretend that she would support Han Sun more than she really would just because she was weaker than him now. That just wasn't her personality. Goodbye, my lady. Please report that I'm going to Sky Palace. Han Sun bowed. He picked up the unconscious Wanner and took Bauer with him as he departed. Seeing Han Sun flee the xenogenic space with Bauer, a strange expression crossed Falling Leaf's face. Miss Mirror, has he really chosen to depart the Extreme King? It is very surprising, but it doesn't surprise me that a brave man like him has made such a choice. Despite Miss Mirror's words, her face looked conflicted. Falling Leaf hesitated for a moment, but ultimately asked, Can he escape this? No, he cannot, Miss Mirror answered with certainty, for that was what she believed. Han Sun was smart, but no matter how smart he was just a first-tier king. Even if he was deified, the furious hordes of Extreme King would still bring him down. It was only a matter of time. Isha wanted Han Sun to go to Sky Palace because the sky had the backing of the very high. If they were willing to protect Han Sun, Then the Extreme King wouldn't simply be able to enter Sky Palace and kill whomever they pleased. But Sky Palace might not protect Han Senator, and even if they agreed to take him in, the trip to get to Sky Palace would be very dangerous for him. After an hour, Miss Mirror called King Bai's phone. "Brother, I have confirmed that he is indeed Han Senator. He has fled the xenogenic space, and he is headed for Sky Palace." After he left the xenogenic space, Han's son waved his hand and sent a white crystal flying out in front of him. It expanded until it became a giant white whale. It was a technological marvel of the ancient crystallizers. It was as powerful as a deified treasure, and it was Han Sen's primary hope of escaping his predicament. With the white whale, he would be able to travel through space for a long time without needing to stop on any other planets along the way. "Han's son, are we really going to escape? We should go and reason with them. Perhaps they will forgive us." Ningyu was going to cry. A man never looks back. Han's son drove the white whale forward. He looked excited and wholly unafraid. "A man never looks back," Bauer repeated in excitement, pumping her fists. "I'm not a big man. I'm a small woman. Let me out. I will beg them for their forgiveness. They will forgive me. They will forgive me because I am a pitiful woman." Ningyu sobbed as she banged on the hatch. Then, she sat with her back to the door. She started to cry hopelessly. Her little green sword remained silently at her waist. Han's son and Bauer ignored him. Ningyu had been affected by that little green sword way too much. He had become a woman with remarkably fragile emotions. Han's son didn't dare to get too close to Ningyu or his little green sword. Han's son was afraid of being affected by the little green sword and turning into what Ningyu had become. He would rather die before that happened. "Bauer, my first officer, you take over the wheel." Han's son stood up and allowed Bauer to take the command chair. "Yes, Daddy Captain." Bauer gladly sat down and accepted control of the white whale. Once he didn't have to pilot the whale, Han's son turned his attention to a map of the galaxy. Going to Sky Palace would be very difficult. If they took the normal route to Sky Palace, their chances of arriving safely were practically zero. "It looks like the Tianxia system is the only way we can go. If we do that, we can then head through the systems of chaos to get to Sky Palace," Han's son muttered to himself as he stared intently at the galactic map. The route he proposed was the most dangerous path they could take, which also made it the safest, as far as the threat of the Extreme King was concerned. That was the only route the Extreme King didn't have total control over. But the systems of chaos were even dangerous for deified elites. When Han's son first followed the Ice Blue Knights through the systems of chaos, he was a first-hand witness to how frighteningly scary that place could be. The Tianxia system was a very dangerous system as well. It was a giant xenogenic space, but it was different from ordinary xenogenic spaces. There were no stars, no seas, and no land. It was just an endless, foggy space that was choked by clouds. All sorts of tools were rendered useless there due to the magnetic storms that existed within the vapor. Ordinary ships were unable to travel through the Tianxia system. Plus, that endless space of clouds was known to host many terrifying xenogenics. Many deified creatures lived all throughout Tianxia system. For an ordinary deified, making the trip would be very difficult. But this was the reason Han's son had chosen to journey through the Tianxia system. The Extreme King wouldn't expect him to go that way. Overnight, Han Sen's name spread across the entire Geno universe. Before that day, not many creatures of the universe knew who Han's son was. But when the Extreme King put out a universal APB for Han's son, races all across the universe learned or remembered his name. Of course, what they remembered more than anything was the very high bounty on him. The reward being offered for Han's son was enough to tempt any deified. Chapter 2445 Tianxia System. Mr. Quinn, why are we not going to the White River System? We seem to be headed for Tianxia System instead. An Extreme King Knight looked Bao Quinn with confusion. The White River System is currently in turmoil. Interstellar pirates are everywhere there. It might seem easy for Han's son to slip through the chaos, but it is a very populated place. Han's son has a bold personality, so it most likely compelled him to go to the Tianxia system, Bao Quinn deduced tonelessly. But he is just a king. Tianxia system isn't a feasible route for someone of his level, the knight said after a moment of thought. Before he was exposed, no one would have believed he had the gall to disguise himself as a prince of the extreme king. Bao Qin responded, his eyes hard. Slow down. Bauer was pushing the white whale through the clouds at an insane speed. Although their transport could move very quickly, it was supposed to be a whale, not a fighter jet. Ningyu was lying on the floor, clutching a chair while bawling her eyes out. Her face was covered in tears and snot. Han's son peered out at the endless clouds, and he couldn't help but frown. Although he already knew that the Tianxia system was dangerous, seeing the system with his own eyes had still taken him aback. Tianxia system's clouds extended in all directions like an ocean, making it hard for Han's son to keep his sense of direction. The endless clouds were colorful, as if the white whale was surrounded by countless fluffy rainbows. The clouds were opaque enough that it was difficult to see beyond the closest layer. Now Han's son and his companions were traveling through blue clouds. They were endless, and they were scarier than the depths of the sea. In between the moving clouds, Han's son could occasionally see cloud beasts dancing. Those crane-like cloud beasts were in flocks of several thousand. They flew together like a cloud of their own, all moving quickly in tandem. Inside the blue clouds, they would sometimes see the flash of magnetic storms. Typically, tools and gadgets were rendered useless by such storms. But fortunately, the big white whale of the crystallizers wasn't affected by powerful magnetic interference. The turbulence of the storms had no effect on the white whale, which was why Han's son wasn't afraid to go through the Tianxia system. The white whale was like a deified creature, but it had no life force. Because of that, it didn't send out a life force for others to sniff out. Ordinary xenogeneics wouldn't attack it, and Han's son had indeed seen many xenogeneics along the way. But most of them completely ignored the white whale. Some of the meaner ones tried to attack the white whale, but they couldn't really damage the hull of the ship. Aside from the cloud beasts, they rarely saw other elites in the system. Even those of the higher races rarely came to hunt here. It was way too dangerous, and it was almost never worth the risk. Pang! As the white whale blazed along, an explosion sounded off to the side. The clouds rumbled and rolled, sort of like a tsunami. It felt as if some terrifying creatures were in the middle of a war somewhere in the fog. Han's son told Bauer to go past whatever it was. After all, they were running for their lives, not going on a safari. It was best not to attract the attention of anything, and so they should focus on getting through the fog as fast as possible. But before Bauer turned the white whale, a few people flew out of the big clouds. Terror was written across their faces, and they appeared to be running for their lives. Their worries meant nothing to Han's senator. He didn't have time to worry about people who were running for their lives. But when he got close enough to see their faces, Han's son jerked back in surprise. Amidst the shadows, there were two pretty women that looked like twins. One was Gu Qingcheng, and the other was Elysian Moon. Han's son couldn't just ignore them. He had Bauer drive the white whale over to Gu Qingcheng. When the people saw the white whale heading toward them, they turned in another direction, trying desperately to get away from this new threat as well. But soon after, they saw the mouth of the white whale open. Someone emerged through the gap. Qingcheng, why are you here? Han's son asked, looking at Gu Qingcheng and Elysian Moon. Gu Qingcheng saw Han's son, and so she flew towards him with Elysian Moon. When the others saw that Gu Qingcheng and Han's son seemed to know each other, they looked relieved. They flew over to the white whale as well. There are deified creatures ahead. We should leave this place, Gu Qingcheng said to Han's son after flying over there. Follow me. Han's son led the way. He invited Gu Qingcheng and Elysian Moon into the white whale. The other people followed Gu Qingcheng, entering the white whale as well. Seeing that Gu Qingcheng knew them, Han's son made no effort to stop their entry. This is a battleship, and it can sail through the Tianxia system? This is so weird, said a 20-year-old man. He was one of the demon, and he had deep purple horns. He looked around the big white whale with great curiosity. Han's son told Bauer to drive the white whale away from the deified creatures. Then he looked at the people who had followed Gu Qingcheng aboard and asked, "Who are they?" There were a dozen of them, and they were all from different races. They were mostly dukes and kings. Gu Qingqing pointed at one of the young feather men. He hired Elysian Moon and me to protect him inside Tianxia system. Han Sun looked at the feather man. The man seemed very young, and his life force wasn't that strong. He was a marquis or duke at best. My name is Qingyu. Thank you for saving me. What is your name? The feather man asked politely. Han Senior. Han Sun had no plans of hiding his identity. You are the student of the newly deified Knife Queen? I have heard your name before, Fang Qingyu said, glancing curiously over Han Senator. Surprisingly, Fang Qingyu wasn't like the other feathers. All of the rest of the feathers hated Han Senator. When Han Sun saw that they had no reaction to his name, he figured that they hadn't heard that he was wanted by the Extreme King. It made sense. Equipment didn't work inside the Tianxia system, so contacting the outside world would have been impossible. They didn't know what had happened out there. Han Sun looked outside and noticed there were no more crazy clouds. They must be far away from the deified Xenogeniac now. This place should be safe. You can leave, Han Sun said, turning to Fang Qingyu. Fang Qingyu quietly responded. Brother Han, I would like you to take me all the way through the Tianxia system. What would require in trade for such a request? Sorry, I'm not here to play games. And I'm not interested in a business deal. Please get off my ship, Han Sun said firmly. He was on the lam. He wasn't interested in spending any more time with these people. He had only saved them because Gu Qingqing was there. Brother Han, please consider it. Tell me how much you want, and I will gladly play you, Fang Qingyu said. Sorry, I am a little busy. I cannot take you guys, Han Sun said. Listen, buddy. You're going to end up embarrassing yourself. One of the destroyed stepped forward from behind Fang Qingyu. He glared at Han Sun as he spoke. Other dukes and kings slowly surrounded them too. Chapter 2446. Don't move. What are you doing? Step back. Don't be rude to Brother Han, Fang Qingyu shouted, his face contorted in displeasure. But the other men didn't seem willing to stop. The destroyed leader laughed and said, Mr. Fang, we are doing this for your own good. Our ride, Wind Cloud Bird, was consumed by that deified Xenogeniac. Without a ship, we cannot travel through the Tianxia system. And now that there is a ship right here, we cannot deny that this is obviously the help of God. If you guys try this, then you are no better than pirates, Fang Qingyu said, not sounding happy at all. Haha, Mr. Fang, you are right. We are pirates. Who else do you think would dare to escort you through a zone like the Tianxia system? The people swapped glances with each other and laughed. Once they were in the Tianxia system, they had been planning to rob Fang Qingyu and kidnap Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon. They didn't have much luck though. They entered the Tianxia system, and mere minutes before they planned to execute their sordid little scheme, they encountered a deified Xenogeniac. You guys, Fang Qingyu's face changed. He was too furious to say anything. With that revelation, the situation made a little more sense to Han Senator. It would have been unusual for normal mercenaries to agree to escort Fang Qingyu into such a dangerous place. Entering the Tianxia system was way too risky. If someone was willing to go there, they were most likely interstellar pirates. Or they were on the lam like Han Sr. You're referring to us as you guys. Haven't you heard of the pirate? We are true pirates, so if you know who I am, then show some respect. I only want money. If I don't get it. The destroyed king laughed threateningly as his sentence trailed off. Hearing the man's claim, Han Sun didn't know what to say. The guy was bluffing. The pirates were a powerful faction, and there were many of them. They robbed the amazingly rich and powerful, often entering high-raced Xenogeniac spaces to attack their prey. They wouldn't behave like these guys, stealing from the weak in such a sneaky way. Many of the pirates started to approach Han Senator. Gu Qingqing frowned and started to draw her sword, but Han Sun stopped her. Han Sun looked at the pirates and smiled. It is good that you aren't leaving. We need people here. We need men that are willing to tidy, clean, and make food. If you want to stay here, you may remain to do such things. When the pirates heard that, they laughed until their eyes watered. The demon man looked extra cocky, and he said, The Rebate and Knife Queen might be famous, but we don't care. Plus, you are only Knife Queen's student. How dare you propose that we become your deckhands? Stop talking to him. As it is his wish, we'll flip the offer around and make him the one who does the washing, cleaning, and cooking for us. One of the pirates said. They were fearless. They had seen the battleship from one end to the other. The ship was host to Han Sun, a little girl, and a very frightened woman. Aside from them, there was only a little red bird. Let me do it, the demon man said with a smile. He unleashed his area. He went over to Han Sun while saying, Do you want to get out, or do you want me to help you? If you want me to help, you will. Before he could finish, Han Sun punched the man in the face. Damn you! The demon man suddenly looked terrifying. He lifted his fist and threw a punch at Han Sun that was imbued with sky demon powers. Very few demons could make use of those powers, and the few that could were mostly of a pure demon blood lineage. The fact that the demon could make use of sky demon powers surprised Han Senator, but the sky demon powers, even at full charge, was useless against Han Senator. That demon man was stunned when Han Sen's fist collided with his own. He had put all of his power into that strike, and Han Sun had blocked it. The demon man had shock written all over his face. His entire body stopped moving, and then a block of ice encased him. The other pirates were shocked too. The demon man wasn't a top king, but his sky demon power was nothing to trifle with. Han Sun had blocked that sky demon power and froze him in a single punch. That surprised them all. Many of the pirates pulled out their knives. Han Sun's hands closed into fists, and then he rushed into them. He threw punches that wrecked each of their king areas and their powers. He froze the pirates one by one, leaving them standing on the deck, motionless and confused. The pirates were dumbfounded. They were just a group of outlaws who weren't really connected to the pirate. And they had never witnessed a king with such impressive strength. Don't. Stay back. If you come any closer, I'll kill her. The destroyed king had the quickest reaction. Upon seeing all his men frozen, he stumbled back toward Bauer and put a knife to her neck. Han Sun had already frozen all the other pirates. When he turned to see the frightened destroyed king holding a knife to Bauer's throat, he laughed and didn't approach. The destroyed king looked at his men in disbelief. The demon and two others had been kings, but Han Sun had dealt with them as easily as he had the dukes. They had all been frozen by Han Sun's punches. The entire group only lasted a few seconds. Han Sun grinned at the destroyed king. He didn't come any closer. Don't take another step. If you do, what happens then is on you. The destroyed king's heart began to pound as Han Sun gazed at him. The destroyed pulled Bauer closer to himself, wanting to retreat with her as a hostage. For now, all he wanted was to leave. The further away he could get, the better. Uncle, said a very young voice from the destroyed king's arms. When he lowered his head, he found that it was the little girl he was using as a hostage. The little girl had a knife to her neck, but she didn't look scared like most little girls would, however. She smiled at him, looking so happy. She even started to laugh. Stop laughing, the destroyed king shouted angrily at the little girl, feeling insulted. Before he could come up with another threat, though, the destroyed king's eyes widened in surprise and terror. The little red bird upon the girl's shoulder jumped into the air, and red flames began to spread from its flapping wings. It was like a volcano erupting. Under the incredible heat, the destroyed king-class knife suddenly melted into molten juice. But the fire in the bird's eyes didn't lessen. In fact, the bird seemed to grow even more enraged. Chapter 2447. Fang Qingyu. The pirates all stood in a line, still chilled and shivering. They stood meekly before Bauer, listening attentively as she scolded them. From now on, you guys are the deckhands of the White Whale. You'll be a cleaner. And you, a servant. Bauer gave them jobs, and the pirates all nodded as they were given assignments. They had been tamed, and none of them dared to refuse to do as they were told. Their eyes sometimes wandered to the little red bird sitting atop Bauer's shoulder, and the sight of it would send another involuntary shiver through them. 10 minutes before, the little bird had burned a 6th-tier destroyed king to nothing more than charcoal. There was too little of him left to even be considered cooked meat. Brother Fang, you should really leave now. Following me will only put you in more danger, Han Sun said to Fang Qingyu. Fang Qingyu shook his head. Brother Han, the Tianxia system isn't a place a marquise can make a living. How long do you think I could survive out there? After that, Fang Qingyu pulled something out of his pocket. He set it down in front of Han's senator with a slight smile. He said, Brother Han, do you remember this? After Han's son got a good look at what Fang Qingyu was holding, he was confused. He didn't recognize the item. The item looked like a common 3x3, 6-sided Rubik's Cube. 9 squares occupied each face. But unlike a normal Rubik's Cube, each square on this cube contained a strange image. Each image was like a small painting of a place that Han's son had never been before. Some of them showed starscapes, whereas others showed mountains and rivers. Others simply showed off rooms or palatial halls. When Fang Qingyu looked at Han Sen's face, he realized that Han's son didn't recognize it. He smiled and said, This is the Wuxia Rubik's Cube. It is a xenogenic treasure from the 1,000 treasures. Everyone who has a Wuxia Rubik's Cube can contact others with a Wuxia Rubik's Cube. You can even use video. To simplify this for you, the Wuxia Rubik's Cube is like a phone. But it is a xenogenic treasure, so you don't need a signal. You can communicate through space without being affected by magnetic storms. This is a powerful tool. If you have a treasure like this, you can ask your family or friends to come pick you up, right? Han Sun said. Fang Qingyu smiled wryly. Brother Han, I'm not showing this to you so that I can leave. I am a member of the 1,000 Treasures Alliance. Although the Alliance isn't considered a part of the 1,000 Treasures race, we have the same level of authority as the 1,000 Treasures. My Wuxia Rubik's Cube can connect to other members of the 1,000 Treasures. They can see everything I see. What does that mean? Han Sun frowned. Fang Qingyu quickly waved his hand and said, Don't misunderstand me, Brother Han. The Wuxia Rubik's Cubes need to be activated for others to see my image. Right now, it is not open, and so no one will know anything about what is going on here. After pausing, Fang Qingyu went on to say, Your battleship is incredible. It can even travel through the Tianxia system unimpeded. The 1,000 treasures want every treasure, including rare items in dangerous places like the Tianxia system. There are so many items in this system that most people couldn't tell what is valuable and what isn't. But with the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, we could send images back to the 1,000 treasures. They could identify what is worth taking and what isn't. If they see something that they want, they will pay a high price for the items you bring back to them. Han Sun smiled and said, Brother Fang, I'm afraid you don't know my situation. I know you are Knife Queen's student. Fang Qingyu looked at Han Sun with a modicum of confusion. Han Sun waved his hand to interrupt him. He smiled and said, You can use your Wuxia Rubik's Cube to contact your 1,000 treasures friends. And perhaps, they might let you know a thing or two about me as well. Fang Qingyu looked confused, and so he turned on his Wuxia Rubik's Cube. In one of the squares, another member of the 1,000 treasures appeared. Fang Qingyu spoke to him, and his expression became increasingly apprehensive as the conversation went on. When the conversation was over, Fang Qingyu turned and stared toward Han Sun for a long moment. A while later he muttered, Brother Han, are you not afraid that I will expose your location? What is there to be afraid of? The Extreme King must already be in the Tianxia system by now, so it doesn't really matter, Han Sun said with a shrug. Now you should understand why I don't want to bring you along. I cannot do the things you want me to, like stopping and collecting treasures along the way. Fang Qingyu's eyes brightened as he looked at Han Sr. If that is true, you should definitely take me with you. Why? Han Sun asked in surprise. Brother Han, I know you only want me off the ship so I don't get pulled into this, which was a kind thought. Also, I'm carrying a Wuxia Rubik's Cube. You probably think that if I go with you, I might expose your location, and the Extreme King might have an easier time following you, Fang Qingyu said. I'm glad that you understand, Han Sun said. Fang Qingyu shook his head. But I also think you are wrong. How so? Han Sun looked at Fang Qingyu with interest. My presence might expose information about your escape, but that sort of exposure isn't necessarily a bad thing, Fang Qingyu said seriously. There was no humor in his expression. What does that mean? I really don't understand, Han Sun replied. Fang Qingyu set the Wuxia Rubik's Cube in front of Han Sr. You can take the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, and you can decide whether you want to turn it on or off. Or you could just throw me off the ship. But I must tell you that if you allow me to stay, I will expose your location with the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, and I will take loads of photos. Fang Qingyu, are you tired of living? Others might be afraid of the 1,000 treasures. But do you think a guy who disguised himself as a prince of the Extreme King would care about the life of some snot-nosed 1,000 treasures member? Elysian Moon snorted in derision. Keep talking. Han's son remained focused on Fang Qingyu, and he didn't seem upset. Calm down, Elysian Moon. What I have said makes sense. I'm not selling Brother Han out. Fang Qingyu paused. He looked at Han's son and said, Brother Han, you are escaping to Sky Palace, yes? Yes, Han's son answered immediately. He had never planned to hide the fact that Sky Palace was his destination. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Miss Mirror know where he was going. In fact, he wanted everyone to know he was going to Sky Palace. If I'm understanding the situation correctly, Brother Han, you are going through the Tianxia system to reach the systems of chaos in order to get to Sky Palace? Fang Qingyu asked. That is correct. Hansen nodded. In that case, you should let me film this. And do it in HD quality. Fang Qingyu sounded really excited. Talk me through your idea, Hansen said to Fang Qingyu. He was beginning to think that this young man was a very interesting person. The path you have selected isn't bad. You have taken a road that the Extreme King have no control over. Plus, you have a pretty amazing ship in the shape of a big whale. It is a fair assessment that the Extreme King won't catch up to you very quickly. But the road you have selected is also very dangerous. Even if the Extreme King don't catch you, your path is full of risks. Both the Tianxia system and the systems of chaos have innumerable dangers, many of which are impossible to predict or anticipate. And the Extreme King have 3 teams of knights in the systems of chaos. They will probably be your greatest opposition. But if I send them a video of you at the proper time, we might actually be able to put them to use. Fang Qingyu's excitement took on a mischievous edge. A giant black beetle soared through the clouds, and upon the back of the black beetle rested a stone castle. Many Extreme King were moving about the castle as they fulfilled their various duties. Mr. Baoqin! Mr. Baoqin! An old member of the Extreme King raced over to the floating garden, where Baoqin was drinking tea. Old butler, what's the rush? Baoqin asked the butler, taking a sip of tea and putting down the cup. The old butler looked very excited. He stepped over to Baoqin's chair and said, We found him. We have found where Han's son is. Oh, where is he? Baoqin jerked his head up in surprise. The investigators themselves hadn't brought him this news, so he wasn't sure how the butler had received word. Here. The old butler brought out a Wuxia Rubik's Cube. He set it in front of Baoqin and pressed one of the squares to show the video. A boat appeared, traveling through a sea of blue clouds. A man sat on the small boat, appearing relaxed and comfortable as he paged through a book. At the front of the boat, a line of creatures were using their power to pull the ship forward. The creatures were from a dozen different races, and there was even a demon amongst them. They were like huskies pulling a sleigh as they struggled to drag the boat forward. If they slowed down for a second, the man atop the boat would wave his hand and whip the creatures. The blows broke their armor and flesh, and they screamed with every strike. The man, meanwhile, never even looked up from his book. One of the creatures pulling the boat, a feather man, was covered in wounds. It looked as if he had received numerous beatings. His head was lowered, but he had secretly activated the Rubik's Cube. He looked very angry. Save me. If anyone can get me out of here, I will give them all the treasure I have in the 1,000 Treasures Alliance. No, I will give 70%, said the man's voice. Baoqin stared at the Rubik's Cube on the table in front of him. What is going on? Baoqin looked at the man on the boat, and then realized it was Han's son, the very man they were after. The old butler was almost vibrating with excitement. The feather man pulling the boat is Fang Qingyu. He is a member of the 1,000 Treasures Alliance. He hired a group to help him explore the Tianxia system. While there, his group encountered Senator Han's son captured them, and set them all to pulling his boat. He appears to be trying to escape the Tianxia system. Fang Qingyu is a feather, but Han Sen doesn't know he is a member of the Thousand Treasures Alliance. Fang Qingyu has a Wuxia Rubik's Cube that he's using to send out a call for help, hoping that someone will rescue him. The old butler sounded so excited. Now that Fang Qingyu is sending messages through the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, we know where Han Sen is. All we must do is give chase. Who is this Fang Qingyu? Bao Qin asked the old butler. Rather than seeming happy, his face had turned down into a frown. The old butler quickly said, I have checked. Fang Qingyu is a feather, but he is an orphan. He was taken in by an elder of the Thousand Treasures Alliance. He has nothing to do with the feathers. And he has nothing to do with Han Senator. That elder from the Thousand Treasures Alliance has already sent people to the Tianxia system in order to save him. Good. Bao Qin nodded. He looked at the video on the Wuxia Rubik's Cube. Can you tell where he is within the Tianxia system? The old butler laughed. The blue sea clouds. There are hundreds of them across the Tianxia system, but the clouds in different areas all have unique identifying aspects. Judging from the information we've gleaned from the video and the direction the boat appears to be proceeding, we have deduced they are located in sea cloud number 75. We're in purple sea cloud number 86, which isn't too far from Han Sen's position. Keep an eye on them and turn us to an intercept course, Bao Qin said. Yes, Han Sen can't outrun us this time. No matter what, the old butler said. Then he sent the order to turn the giant black beetle toward Han Senator. As they began traveling through clouds that Han Sen had already passed through, the old butler frowned. Weird. When they went through here, they must have left some trace of their passage, even if it was only a single hair. Why can I not sense anything? Did we go the wrong way? Bao Qin smiled and said, if we found obvious evidence of their passage, then we'd know that we weren't on Han Sen's trail. He's too good to leave behind obvious signs of his presence. Go faster. We must be going the right way. Yes, the old butler answered, and the black beetle accelerated. They didn't discover any signs of Han Sen's presence, but based on the video of Fang Qingyu's Wuxia Rubik's Cube, they knew they were headed in the right direction. Han Sen's little boat wasn't moving nearly as fast as the black beetle. By the old butler's estimation, they would catch up to Han Sen in another 18 hours. At that moment, they glanced at the video on the Wuxia Rubik's Cube and saw that Han Sen's boat was coming to a stop. A group of cloud beasts appeared in front of the boat, then turned aggressively and attacked. Chaos ensued. Fang Qingyu was trying to fight off the Xenogeniacs. He couldn't use the Wuxia Rubik's Cube at the same time, so the video was switched off. Oh no! It is a bunch of high-level cloud beasts. A few of them are king-class cloud apes. If Fang Qingyu is killed, we'll lose track of Han Sen, the old butler said, looking glum. Go full speed. Find them before they finish fighting the cloud beasts, Bao Qin commanded, his face grim. Chapter 2449 Demon Spirit. The giant black beetle flew at high speed toward the last location shown in the video. When they arrived, they found many cloud beasts in the midst of battle. But because they were surrounded by so many clouds, they could only catch occasional glimpses of the battleground. Bao Qin ordered the black beetle to be brought to a stop, then turned back to the old butler. Let's not get too close to the battleground. Before we enter, we should send someone in to scout. Before the old butler could agree, a huge white whale appeared out of the clouds and headed straight toward them. Following the white whale was a group of cloud beasts. They seemed very angry. Ready yourselves to fight, Bao Qin shouted, frowning as the white whale approached. The black beetle's extreme king knights quickly assembled into battle formations. The big white whale approached at high speed, but instead of ramming the black beetle as they expected, the whale dove and went right under their ship. Bao Qin and the extreme king knights wondered why the white whale had decided to simply pass them by, but they didn't have much time to think about it. The cloud beasts that had been chasing the whale surged over them in a wave. A king-class group of giant cloud dragons were flying behind the cloud beasts, but even they seemed weak and unthreatening compared to what followed. The giant cloud dragons were hitched to a rainbow-colored carriage made of cloud stone. Despite their incredible power and ferocity, the cloud dragons were being used as mere beasts of burden. Damn it! It's the sea demon's carriage. We have to get out of here. Bao Qin's face paled slightly, and his words were rushed. But it was already too late. The sea beasts were upon them, and the giant cloud dragons dragging the stone carriage arrived before the black beetle. The white whale had vanished at some point, and the giant black beetle was now surrounded by monsters of the clouds. The Extreme King Knights engaged the cloud beasts in combat. Good job, everyone, Han Sun said to Fang Qingyu and the others as he admired the Extreme King, who were now fighting the cloud beasts. It is our honor to work for the captain and the little captain, one of the pirates said, bowing deeply. An ingratiating smile covered his face. The captain and the little captain are the smartest people in the whole universe. Those Extreme King aren't even fit to lick your boots. The captain is so handsome. The little captain is so beautiful. You both hold the universe in your hands, and every decision you make is a turning point in history. Long live the big captain and small captain. Long live the big captain and small captain. Han Sun looked at all the pirates who were gushing praises for him and Bauer, and he couldn't help but admit that it felt pretty good. Bauer was loving it. No wonder everyone wants to become a tyrant with an evil right-hand man. This is great, Han Sun thought happily. Luckily, Han Sun hadn't deluded himself into thinking that this was actually his idea. Fang Qingyu had come up with the plan, and Han Sun was only reaping the advantages of its employment. It was just as Fang Qingyu had said. The Tianxia system was way too dangerous, and getting through it safely might have been little more than wishful thinking. They hadn't been planning to encounter the scary cloud dragons after all. Han Sun didn't dare to fight the cloud dragons. He piloted the white whale away from them as he tried to escape. Then, he allowed Fang Qingyu to create a scenario that would draw in the Extreme King search party. Once the Extreme King arrived, they had earned the ire of the monsters within minutes. The cloud dragons weren't happy to have intruders in their territory. Han Sun didn't know what the stone carriage behind the cloud dragons was, but after Fang Qingyu used the Wanjia Rubik's Cube to contact his thousand treasure stepfather, they learned that it was the legendary sea demon carriage. If not for the thousand treasures, Han Sun might not have fled from the carriage in time. It would have certainly been a nasty fight. That thousand treasures elder used the Rubik's Cube to tell Han Sun that the sea demon carriage was the most mysterious and scary xenogenics in the Tianxia system. The legends said that the giant cloud dragons pulled the Tianxia system's leader in that carriage. Not many people had ever glimpsed what was inside that carriage though. When the sea demon carriage opened, anyone who saw it usually died shortly thereafter. The white whale hovered some distance from the battlefield. They hid amidst the clouds, and Fang Qingyu looked very excited. He filmed the fight between the Extreme King and the cloud beasts intently, streaming the video to his thousand treasures stepfather. Fang Qingyu took special care to capture the sea demon carriage on video. He would never miss an opportunity to film that. He wanted the chance to film the being inside the sea demon car. He wanted a first-hand account of this fight. That information might be the most valuable thing he had ever possessed. Of course, it wasn't just the information that would fetch a high price. The video itself would be worth a lot. Fang Qingyu's stepfather had already started working on it. The Thousand Treasures was the best organization in the universe when it came to making money, and a video like that would be a money-making machine. The video would require some editing before it was released though. Han Sun really admired the business acumen of the Thousand Treasures. Plus, with Fang Qingyu remaining in constant contact with his stepfather, the Thousand Treasures could give them information about any creatures they encountered in the Tianxia system. Han Sun could avoid many potential dangers and pitfalls, and they wouldn't have to go up against a creature that might be too much for them. They could even detour around areas with a particularly high death toll. It's out! Fang Qingyu shouted very excitedly. Han Sun looked back to the battleground. The cloud dragons were cringing away from the open door of the carriage, and after a few long seconds, something stepped through the open door. All eyes were drawn to the newly emerged monster. Han Sun had never seen a living creature like it before. Its body was like a black cloud, with a black demonic form standing somewhere in the middle. It was impossible to see exactly what the creature looked like, but it possessed a dark humanoid shape. But the being seemed to have a shadowy tail, and its hair was like fire. A pair of eyes could be seen through the dark cloud, burning with a red and purple flame. Only its disturbing eyes could be seen clearly, as everything else about its form was murky and indistinct. Bao Qin stood atop the castle, watching the scary creature emerge from the stone carriage. Demon spirit, we of the Extreme King have never offended you. We were pursuing someone else along this path, but that scary creature didn't answer. Its eyes glowed evilly, and it threw a punch toward Bao Qin. Boom! Han Sun and the others didn't see the punch land, but they could see the enormous black beetle explode under the force of the shockwave. Blood rained everywhere, dyeing the blue clouds scarlet around it. Some Extreme King Knights hadn't been able to get clear of the black beetle, and so the hit destroyed their King Knight bodies. They disintegrated, becoming a part of that red mist. Bao Qin hung in the air, and the ghostly demon spirit teleported directly in front of him. It has started. Han Sen's eyes brightened with anticipation. There was going to be a deified fight. If the two fighters ended up badly injured, he could take advantage of the situation and claim them both. Chapter 2450 Blood-Eye Evil God Beast Soul. Han Sun watched the battle in the hopes of finding an opportunity to score some easy kills. But something soon happened that made him rethink his plans. Music wafted into Han Sen's ears. Upon hearing the first note, Han Sen's mind seemed to buzz, like the vibration that would be left behind if someone struck him on the head with a hammer. Han Sen only found the sensation to be slightly uncomfortable, but the Duke-class pirates began to fall over, coughing up blood as they curled into fetal position. They clawed at their ears, screaming in agony. They were bleeding from all 7 of their holes. Oh no! A deified Extreme King has used a sonic attack. The white whale is tough, but it is weak against sonic attacks. We have to go. Han Sun turned the white whale and piloted it far away. The white whale was just a piece of technology, so it couldn't adapt to everything that was thrown at it. Fang Qingyu was the weakest person on board, and so he was doing far worse than all the others. Luckily, Han Sun released a king area that subdued most of the acoustic effect. If he hadn't done that, the sonic powers would have liquefied Fang Qingyu's brain. The white whale traveled through the clouds at full speed. After tens of thousands of miles, the effectiveness of the sonic powers started to subside. But Han Sen's crew still suffered from the scary shockwaves of the battle. After what had just happened, Han Sun was no longer interested in trying to kill the fighters once they were injured. He just wanted to leave the area. And that was that. Don't go. If you leave now, we won't film the fight. And if we don't film the fight, everything we've invested will be wasted. I have to go back and keep filming. Fang Qingyu shouted at Han Sun, as soon as he was feeling better. You're crazier than I am. You're willing to die for money? Han Sun looked at Fang Qingyu with utter shock. This man really did care about money above all else. The Thousand Treasures Alliance cannot invest in a venture that loses money. I have to go back, Fang Qingyu said with obvious difficulty. Seeing that Fang Qingyu wasn't kidding, Gu Qingqing said, "It won't matter how much money you make if you're dead, will it?" Fang Qingyu shook his head with a wry smile. You guys don't understand. This isn't only about me. My team invested a lot into this. If you don't follow the plan we made, I won't be the only one getting screwed. My whole team will be. They invested all their money into this. That means they will all go bankrupt, and that might result in them all committing suicide. Give me your Wuxia Rubik's code, and I will film it for you, Han Sun said after a moment. Han Sun hadn't wanted to leave so abruptly, either, but Bauer, Ningyu, and Gu Qingqing were all on board the ship. He didn't want to put their lives at risk. Read latest chapters at List Novel. If he went back there alone, there wouldn't be as much to worry about. I don't know if. Fang Qingyu was shocked. It'll be fine. Han Sun took the Wuxia Rubik's cube out of Fang Qingyu's hands. Then he spoke to Bauer. Bauer, take them farther away. I will catch up. After that, he took the Wuxia Rubik's cube and exited the white whale. He headed straight back for the battlefield, with Bauer guiding them away and the little red bird protecting them. They should be able to survive an encounter with even a deified xenogeniac. Han Sen wasn't too worried about their safety, and in regards to Han Sen himself, he knew he would be able to survive. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone back alone. The clouds were rumbling. The music sounded eerie and demonic. Under the force of the sonic power, a big blue cloud was roiling and rolling away like an ocean wave. Many xenogeniacs and cloud beasts, which commonly lived inside such clouds, were all scrambling away as they fled desperately for their lives. But some of the smaller cloud beasts and xenogeniacs didn't have enough time to escape. They were killed by the sonic sounds. They died before they could leave the clouds, and their corpses were tossed along with the rolling clouds like flotsam caught by the tide. Han Sen used his Dongxian area and jade skin. He summoned all of his strength to fight back that sonic power. But even still, he could barely withstand it as he drew near to the battlefield. He felt like his head was going to get ripped open by that soul piano note. Han Sen's heart leaped in his chest, and he summoned a beast soul. It was an eyeball-shaped beast soul with a red pupil. It was the deified class Blood-Eye Evil God beast soul Han Sen had managed to retrieve from Du God City. The Blood-Eye Evil God's body was the eyeball Han Sen had managed to kill as it tried to escape. The statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes had merely some sort of host or shell that the creature inhabited. Mutant deified class beast soul Blood-Eye Evil God. I-type the beast soul flew into Han Sen's left eye and grew incredibly thin and formed itself into a half-sphere. Then it fitted itself onto Han Sen's left eyeball like a contact lens. Han Sen's left eye was veiled in red. His entire eyeball gleamed crimson, and a bloody light seemed to swirl within the orb. The purple-eye butterfly's power lay in its ability to analyze and rewind the history of an object. The power of the Blood-Eye Evil God beast soul was different. As the bloody color deepened within Han Sen's left eye, the red light of his pupil seemed to swirl restlessly. Suddenly, the red light poured out of Han Sen's eye. The blood light wrapped around Han Sen's entire body, turning him into a bloody shadow. His face was no longer visible, and he seemed more like an unsettling absence than anything tangible. But his entire body, or what could be seen of it, was blood red. When Han Sen became this blood shadow, everything in his vision changed. Han Sen saw a giant cloud dragon flying far away. He could see the creature's eyes, and he saw himself reflected in those eyes. The next second, Han Sen's heart jumped. He leaped into those eyes. Han Sen found himself hiding somewhere within the creature's vision, as if he had slipped behind the reflective surface of the cloud dragon's eyes. Han Sen would be safe and invisible inside that space unless the eye's reflective surface was broken. That was the only way someone could hurt him now. Han Sen hid within the giant cloud dragon's eye, and he turned, realizing that he could see what the dragon saw as well. When this giant cloud dragon's eyes met those of another dragon, Han Sen moved. He traveled into the eyes of the second dragon. This movement was similar to jumping from mirror to mirror. He didn't have teleportation abilities, but he couldn't be attacked. And furthermore, no one could see his body. It was like Han Sen could look into a mirror, then trade places with his own reflection. Han Sen's entire body could teleport into the eyes of whoever he saw. Rather than just assuming their vision, he was actually physically transporting himself. But when Han Sen moved into the eyes of another being, the creature's pupils would turn blood red. It was an obvious indicator of his presence, and it would be easy for others to spot where he was. After doing a few more jumps, a giant cloud dragon's eyes turned to meet Bao Qin's eyes. Han Sen immediately teleported into the deified Extreme King's eyes. Han Sen's vision became Bao Qin's vision. Being in the man's eyes allowed Han Sen to see what he saw. I jumped straight into a deified elite's eyes? Han Sen was ecstatic. Not even a deified elite could stop the powers of the Blood-Eye Evil God beast soul. This surprised him quite a bit. Taking out the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, he used it in accordance with the instructions given to him by Fang Qingyu. He made contact with Fang Qingyu's stepfather and streamed the video over to him. Treasure Identifier Elder, Mr. Qingyu's signal is off. What do we do? The video we have is about to run out, and every station is waiting for more. If there is no more content, we won't earn a penny. Our money will be gone, and we will have to pay fines for breaking the contract. Cold sweat was gathering on Kevin's forehead. Looking like an ant being held over boiling water, he looked over to the treasure identifier elder. This plan was secret. They couldn't reveal the content. They signed a contract with different media platforms of the various high races, purchasing airtime for their video footage. Those media sources had rigid requirements for the content they put out, however. If the Thousand Treasures group couldn't put out the content in time, they were going to lose money. The treasure identifier elder's phone was ringing constantly. There was no need for him to look at it, because he already knew that it was his business partners that were calling. The plan had failed. He would lose his savings, which was an acceptable loss, but there were many other people that were going to go bankrupt with him. And that wasn't even what he was worried about the most. Xing, you must know how important it is to keep the video running. But the communication has come to an end. Is he? The treasure identifier elder's face was shifting through a variety of emotions. Suddenly, the Wuxia Rubik's Cube lit up. A new video was being streamed from Feng Qingyu's Rubik's Cube. There he is, and there's the fight. Quick! Record all of this footage, and get it processed immediately. Kevin was so excited that he was screaming the instructions. This video is... How is he filming from that perspective? The treasure identifier elder stared at the video with wide eyes. The video showed the fight with the demon spirit, but it seemed to be filmed from a first-person perspective. It was like the person filming was the same person who was fighting the demon spirit. Every detail was crystal clear. Normal people couldn't have made any sense of the raw footage. To them, it would only have looked like blurring shapes and blinding flashes of light. The video stream of the Wuxia Rubik's Cube was recorded by special equipment, and the Thousand Treasures team edited it carefully before releasing it through their media sources. They slowed it down by an order of magnitude. Otherwise, most people wouldn't have had any idea what was going on. Only someone like the treasure identifier elder himself could watch the raw footage and understand what was actually happening. That Han Sun has bad luck. He hid inside the Tianxia system and kidnapped a few people to pull his boat. Then he met a guy with a Wuxia Rubik's Cube. Now the Extreme King knows where he is, and he won't be able to escape. They ran into a group of cloud beasts. Why did the video shut off? It's back now. What the hell? The Extreme King are fighting the cloud beasts. Holy shit. That's the sea demon car. The sea demon car is opening. Oh damn. Why is it gone? All the media channels were playing the videos the treasure identifier elder was producing, all at the same time. The display drew the attention of many viewers, because equipment inside the Tianxia system was usually affected by the magnetic storms. Most films that came from the system were basically unwatchable. Capturing the sea demon car on film would be even more difficult. Every race was drawn by this new showcase, and viewership figures skyrocketed. Many different races populated the Geno universe, and most races had at least 1 billion members. Some of the bigger races had tens of billions. The viewership figures ascended to a frightening sum in a very short amount of time. But the moment that the sea demon car opened, the video went dark. All of the viewers watching became furious at the tease, and it made them want to smash their viewing devices. Because the video had been cut off before, though, they hoped it would come back, and they could continue to watch. But then, some words appeared on the blank screen. This content is now only accessible on a paid channel. Please enter the paid channel to view the secrets of the sea demon car and the fate of the Extreme King. This is being streamed live from a massive battle in the Tianxia system. And this program is brought to you by the Hammer. Use the xenogenic treasures of the Hammer to live a good life. Motherfucking Hammer. Those money-hungry bastards. Everyone across the Geno universe was upset about being baited into purchasing a paid channel. But still, many nobles accepted it. They paid to watch the video, and immediately switched to the new channel. They didn't want to miss a single second of the action. This was the first time the sea demon car had been shown in such clarity and detail. Many people would have spent vast amounts of money for any scrap of information they could find on the elusive xenogenic. But now they only had to spend a small amount for an entire video focused on the creature. It was worth it. It was way too worth it. Real elites couldn't care less about the cost of a single inexpensive video. Even ordinary people could afford to watch. The paid channel cost about as much as a pack of cigarettes. When they entered the paid mode, they saw the demon spirit exit the sea demon car. Then the creature blew up the Black Beetle ship and engaged Bao Qin directly. Holy shit! The demon spirit is strong. Overwhelming. It is scary. So that's what the creature inside the sea demon car looks like. It isn't very physically large, but it's still quite scary to watch. Huh. What's going on? This perspective makes it look like someone is filming and fighting the demon spirit at the same time. Is Bao Qin filming this? It must be Bao Qin. Who else could film from such a perspective? Are the Extreme King in some sort of economic crisis? He is a deified elite of the Extreme King, and he needs to earn money by streaming? And he added some motherfucking sponsor and advert. How desperately do they want to earn money? Don't say that. It isn't easy to become a deified elite. While they are strong, they still require resources. Conversations about the video raged everywhere, and most people seemed to be complaining about Bao Qin's behavior. The Extreme King themselves were quite shocked, and they weren't sure about what was going on either. They didn't know why Bao Qin would stream this video of a battle and allow the media of all the different races to broadcast it. A first-person perspective fight was incredibly exciting for viewers. Their blood boiled as they watched. This was a deified fight, which wasn't something that usually allowed spectators. If they had been anywhere near this fight in real life, they would have run away. They wouldn't have the guts to stay and watch two godly beings fight. And even if they were ballsy enough to stay and watch, they wouldn't have been able to see much anyway. These videos have been edited by professionals, allowing ordinary people to understand what was going on. It also let them see just how powerful deified beings could be. Han Sen was watching the fight through Bao Qin's eyes, and to him, it looked even crazier. The demon spirit was like dust on the wind. Its body was very light, and even Bao Qin's eyes and speed could barely keep track of the xenogeniac. Bao Qin struck repeatedly, but he only hit the places where the demon spirit had just been. If not for the harp in Bao Qin's hand, he would have already been killed by the demon spirit's fist. Luckily for him, his harp was able to weaken the demon spirit's speed and power. Bao Qin's long fingers strummed the harp in his hands, and the notes he played were like waves of substance chains. They spread out through the clouds, and the sea of blue clouds moved and vibrated with the rhythm of the harp's music. The clouds weren't the only things responding to the music either. Every substance, including sets of armor, weaponry, and xenogeniac treasures, began to physically twist and warp under the spell of the harp's song. They became as limp as cooked noodles, waving along with the melody of the harp. The large bodies of the giant cloud dragons were deformed by the music, and with every new twisting note, more of their bones shattered. Before long, the great dragons had been reduced to boneless meat sticks. The sight made Han Sen's scalp prickle. He didn't know what sort of sonic substance chain power Bao Qin was wielding, but it was crushing every single thing in sight. It was way too scary. Even with that power, Bao Qin was far from having the upper hand. That black form of the demon spirit kept flashing between the sonic forces. Han Sen couldn't see what sort of area it had employed, but the creature's power seemed to be protecting it against Bao Qin's deforming power. However, Bao Qin's attacks were slowly reducing the demon spirit's speed and power. The demon spirit's eyes were like those of a ghost, and they stared unblinkingly at Bao Qin. Bao Qin met the gaze of the demon spirit many times, but Han Sen didn't dare use his new beast soul to jump into the demon spirit's eyes. Han Sen didn't know how strong the Blood-Eye Evil God's power truly was, and he didn't know what sort of powers were able to restrict it. That demon spirit had demonstrated frightening abilities so far, and so Han Sen gave up on the idea of entering its eyes. As the fight went on, Han Sen quickly realized something depressing. Bao Qin wasn't the demon spirit's equal. The monster was slowly boxing him in. Bao Qin made many attempts to escape, but try as he might, he couldn't shake off the demon spirit. The situation was growing increasingly dangerous for the Extreme King. Han Sen was hoping that Bao Qin and the demon spirit would end up injuring each other equally, so that Han's son could swoop in and finish them both. But it had become evident that there was too much of a power gap between the two fighters. Bao Qin didn't stand a chance of even injuring the demon spirit. If Bao Qin was killed, the protection that his eyes offered Han's son would be destroyed. Han's son would have to make a getaway. When that happened, the demon spirit would probably target him. Even if Han's son wanted to make an escape now, his opportunities to do so had mostly disappeared. All the cloud beasts xenogeniacs had either died or run away. Bao Qin wasn't going to be meeting the eyes of another creature anytime soon. And so Han's son couldn't escape using his blood-eye evil god beast soul. That beast soul could only interact with the eyes of others. It didn't have mirror powers like the ones that Miss Mirror used. If Han's son wanted to escape unseen, he needed his host to make eye contact with another. Pang! The demon spirit landed a blow across Bao Qin's chest, tearing his armor. The godly muscles of Bao Qin's jade-like chest were shredded, and blood welled within the wound. But the godly blood didn't spill out. The blood became black, smoky dust that rose like steam. It billowed up into a small, rather unsettling cloud. Seeing the smoky, dust-like god blood, the demon spirit licked its lips hungrily and teleported over to Bao Qin. Ding! One of the strings of Bao Qin's harp broke, and a new burst of blood turned into smoke and opened like a flower amidst the clouds. Bao Qin isn't going to survive this. Han's son made his decision. He turned off the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, and when the injured Bao Qin met the gaze of the demon spirit, he jumped into the demon spirit's eyes. Please let this work, Han's son prayed desperately. The eyes of the demon spirit were like the soulless eyes of a shark. They were red like fire. They looked rather transparent. Han's son didn't know if the blood-eye evil god beast soul could find refuge within them. In the next second, Han's son realized that his vision had indeed changed. When he realized that he was looking directly at the injured Bao Qin, happiness and relief flooded through him. He knew he was now residing inside the eyes of the demon spirit. Looking out from the demon spirit's eyes was different than Han's son had initially imagined it would be. Because the demon's eyes were so red, Han's son had thought that looking through them would provide a view that was tinted and murky. But instead, the view from the demon's eyes was actually entirely black and white. Everything Han's son could see was a blur of various shades of gray. It took Han's son only a moment to realize that his eyes couldn't keep up with the eyes of the demon spirit. He used his purple eye butterfly to lessen the disparity between his vision and the demon spirit's, and the images before him quickly resolved. Unless he had the purple eye butterfly active, it was like looking out of a high-speed train with an extremely narrow field of view. Everything he saw on the outside zoomed by at incredible speed, and objects became blurry and difficult to make out. With the purple eye butterfly, though Han's son could see everything, the demon spirit hovered in front of Bao Qin. Every string on the man's harp was broken, and the demon spirit's ghost-like hands then went through the harp to pierce right into Bao Qin's chest. The smoke from Bao Qin's deified blood was spreading. Bao Qin gritted his teeth, and his body released a very bright light. The man's fingers reached for the stringless harp. Then, some invisible strings appeared beneath his fingers. Every string released a weird sonic power that tore through space to create a giant space vortex. The vortex pulled in the nearby clouds, and then it began to pull on the demon spirit and Bao Qin himself. In order to resist the force of the vortex, the demon spirit had to teleport away. Bao Qin's body, on the other hand, was sucked into the space vortex. After a short amount of time, the space vortex disappeared. The demon spirit grunted coldly. It turned around and returned to its sea demon car. The giant cloud dragons were all dead, so the carriage was simply hanging in place. The demon spirit waved its hand, and the cloud sea began to roll. The clouds became tornadoes that drew in and consumed even more clouds. Soon, the tornadoes transformed into new cloud dragons that flew over to the sea demon car. Han's son was frozen. The powers and techniques of this demon spirit were crazy. It was difficult for Han's son to comprehend the power it must have taken to summon so many cloud dragons so quickly. I cannot let him find me. Even blinding him wouldn't be enough to let me escape successfully, Han's son believed. The demon spirit was back inside the sea demon car. The carriage turned and headed for the deep sea of the clouds. The xenogeniacs and cloud beasts all around were now dead. All that remained was the carriage that the demon spirit traveled in. The sea demon car had remained undamaged through the entire fight. Han Sen couldn't imagine what material it must have been made of. Han Sen wanted to use the eyes of the cloud dragons to leave, but the cloud dragons didn't dare to look directly at the demon spirit. The demon spirit didn't look at them, either, and so Han Sen couldn't find the opportunity he needed. There is no need to worry. As long as the demon spirit doesn't notice me, he will eventually look into the eyes of another creature. Sooner or later, I will be able to escape. As the demon spirit continued to remain oblivious to Han Sen's presence, Han Sen finally began to relax. Inside the stone carriage, the demon spirit stared forward without closing its eyes. Perhaps the creature's eyes simply couldn't be closed. As he looked through the eyes of the demon spirit, Han Sen could see the interior of the stone carriage. Words were written across the stone walls. Because the demon spirit's vision was completely black and white, Han Sen couldn't tell what the true colors of the words were. Most things that Han Sen looked at were represented by gray tones. The words had been written in a tiny script, and each letter was no bigger than a fly. But when Han Sen looked closer, he realized that the words were all ancient and strong. It was like there was an infinite, amazing universe residing within them. Han Sen was happy. He assumed it was some high-class Geno art, but it was written in the common language of the universe. Since it was written in a language he knew, it would be easy for him to remember. But when he looked a little closer, he realized the words weren't a Geno art. In fact, their content was confusing, almost nonsensical. Han Sen couldn't see where the writing began. The writing seemed to run across multiple walls of the carriage, but because the demon spirit was turning his head, Han Sen could only see the wall that was directly in front of him. Getting my wish by using your love. I'm so sorry. I could then make the wish again, to bring love back to life. But I would accept grand suffering. That is the reason I turned into a demon, and I was unable to continue with the relationship. I want to end this life, but it is very difficult. Han Sen read it all out, stopping when he reached the end of what he could see. Did the person who wrote this down make a wish to a god, then regret that wish? Who is the person making wishes? I cannot believe he tried to make a wish twice. Normal people only make one wish and suffer as a result, but this guy made 2 wishes. A wish to become a demon. Is the demon spirit the one who wrote this? Han Sen was confused. It was almost unthinkable, but based on what Han Sen knew, it seemed most likely that the demon spirit had been the one who wrote on the walls. Who else could have written something on the interior of the sea demon car? It's a shame I cannot see the full contents. If I could, I would be able to understand the cause and the consequences. If this demon spirit really is the person that the text mentions, then he must have been someone awesome before he became the demon that he is today. As Han Sen kept thinking to himself, the demon spirit's vision moved. The demon spirit glanced to his left, and Han Sen followed its gaze. There was something carved on that wall as well, but the demon spirit's vision didn't linger on the words. It looked away quickly, and Han Sen didn't have time to read the words. When the demon spirit turned in a different direction, though, Han Sen made out the image of a woman. The picture was very simple. It was only a few lines, but it was enough to draw out the figure of a long-haired woman. There was no face, but the figure alone was enough to let Han Sen know that she had been beautiful. The demon spirit looked upon the image of the woman carved into the stone. He slowly reached out and touched the stone, but his hands were like dust. When he touched the stone, his fingers spread out like smoke. The demon spirit continued to reach for the woman's image, but every time he touched it, his hand disappeared in a puff of dust. And when he pulled his hands away from the stone tablet, his dust-scattered hands coalesced again. For some reason, Han Sen felt a knot form in his throat. The scene moved him more than he had expected. The demon spirit reached out many times, trying in vain to brush his fingers over the picture, but he eventually gave up. Instead, he just stared at the picture of the woman on the stone wall. He spaced out looking at it. Han Sen could see there were a few small words next to that picture of a woman. When he focused, he could read what was written. I will not age for 300 million years. But even so, I will never be able to touch your face again. As Han's son read that line of words, the sickening feeling sank deeper and deeper in his stomach. He wasn't a fan of tragedies, but just seeing those words allowed him to understand what sort of tragedy he was looking at. The demon spirit tipped his head to the side, so he could just stare at the woman's picture. He didn't move, and time flowed by unnoticed. At least an hour passed in this motionless state, and the sea demon car continued to more steadily forward the whole time, pulled by the giant cloud dragons that the demon spirit had summoned from the clouds. Even if Han's son wanted to escape, there was no way he could right now. He had no choice but to wait. Fortunately, I sent the little red bird with Bauer. If the little red bird was trapped here with me, Bauer would be in danger, Hansen thought to himself. Hansen didn't know when the demon spirit would exit the sea demon car again. Hansen noticed that nothing he did in the demon spirit's eyes seemed to draw its attention. So he summoned Wanner, who he had placed inside Destiny's tower. Wanna had been in a coma all this time, and she hadn't woken up. Hansen couldn't hold her in his arms all day every day, and so, he had placed her inside Destiny's tower. Hansen's Sea of Soul hosted Destiny's tower, and Wanna hadn't turned blonde the entire time she was inside. If I cannot find a chance to escape, I might need Wanner's power. Hansen checked her status, and he noticed that she had recovered somewhat. Although her body was still rather weak, it wasn't abhorrently faint like it had been. There was no chance of her suddenly giving up the ghost. It really was the blonde hair mode that brought her so close to death. She recovers as long as her hair stays black, but she's healing so slowly. If this keeps going, who knows how long it might take for her to return to normal again. Hansen tried to send his power into her, but it didn't seem to work. He could put his power into Wanner's body, but her body didn't absorb the energy. It was like pouring water into a cup full of holes. No matter how much power he put in, it would just leak out. There was nothing he could do, so he put Wanner back inside Destiny's tower. He used the Wuxia Rubik's Cube to contact the treasure identifier elder. When the video transmission stopped for the final time, it hadn't affected the treasure identifier elder too much. They had already earned the money they needed to. Their profits might not have been maximized, but their earnings were still substantial. Many creatures had wanted the video to keep going, but the treasure identifier elder had no more footage, so they had stopped the stream. When Hansen contacted the treasure identifier elder again, the treasure identifier elder was alone in his room. When the old man saw that it wasn't Feng Qingyu contacting him via the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, he frowned and asked, "Where is Qingyu?" "Don't worry, treasure identifier elder. Qingyu is fine, but I was separated from him. Is there a way for me to contact him and the others?" This was why Hansen was contacting the treasure identifier elder. The Wuxia Rubik's Cube is an important possession of the 1,000 treasures. Only elder members are allowed to have them. Qingyu's Wuxia Rubik's Cube is mine, and he only has one. If you have the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, there is no way to contact them while they remain in the Tianxia system. The treasure identifier elder paused and asked, "Do you know where they are? I can send people to the Tianxia system to extract them." Hansen didn't say anything. If he had been with Feng Qingyu, he would have given their location to the treasure identifier elder. But Bauer and the others were with him, and Hansen didn't trust this man with their safety. The treasure identifier elder was smart. He knew what Hansen was worried about. After a moment of thought, he said, "Actually, even if we went out to find them, I doubt that we could. The Extreme King elites and many others wish to capture you and haul you back to the Extreme King. They should be in the Tianxia system already. It is too late for a traditional search and rescue party. If you want your friends and Qingyu to be saved, there is one other way." "You're saying that I should use the Wuxia Rubik's Cube to leak my location?" Hansen immediately understood what the treasure identifier elder was implying. The treasure identifier elder nodded and said, "Yes. The Extreme King have come looking for you, not your companions. If you keep letting them know where you are, they won't have any reason to conduct a general search that might endanger Qingyu and the others." "I'll think about it. Han-sun turned off the Wuxia Rubik's Cube. What would be the point of using the Rubik's Cube now? He was inside the eyes of the spirit demon. If he began streaming video, people would only see the interior of the stone carriage. That wouldn't be very helpful for anyone. Han-sun needed to wait for a moment when a video stream would tell the Extreme King exactly where he was. Only then would it be worth turning the Rubik's Cube back on. I really hope that the demon spirit is planning to leave the sea demon car soon. If he decides to stay in here for a few hundred years, that will be bad, Han-sun thought morosely. Luckily, Han-sun's worries didn't jinx his situation. Despite the time he spent envisioning the worst-case scenario, it didn't come to pass. After another half-day of travel, the sea demon car came to a stop. The spirit demon finally turned its eyes away from the wall of the carriage. The creature pushed the door open and slid out. He's finally out. Han-sun was filled with happiness, but when he saw what was outside the carriage he froze. Before he entered the Tianxia system, Han-sun had done a lot of research about the place. He had learned that the system was filled with clouds and fog, but no planets were known to exist within it. But as the demon spirit moved out of the carriage, Han-sun saw a giant island hanging in the clouds. The clouds surrounding them were pure white now, unlike the blue clouds that Han-sun had seen last. These fluffy white clouds looked like they belonged in an ordinary sky. The demon spirit dropped onto the grass of the island. The fresh green grass turned to dust the moment that the demon spirit touched it. The dust rose and danced around the feet of the spirit demon, like ashes rising from a disturbed grave. When he fought, the demon spirit moved so quickly that it looked like he was teleporting. In this place, though, he walked forward as slowly as a normal person would, heading for a mountain at the center of the island. The small mountain wasn't high, probably only reaching 400 meters at its peak. Han-sun could have jumped over such a small mountain in a single leap. The demon spirit could probably have done the same with only a thought. But instead, the demon spirit was walking up the mountain, step by step. He moved patiently, almost methodically. What is he trying to do? Han-sun wondered curiously. Although he wanted to flee, there were no creatures whose eyes he could jump into. The island was covered in grass and dotted with strange flowers, but there were no creatures to be seen. The demon spirit left the sea demon car behind without so much as a backward glance at the cloud dragons. Because of that, Han-sun couldn't even escape by jumping into the eyes of a cloud dragon. Since he couldn't run, Han-sun spent his time trying to guess what the demon spirit would do on the mountain. He had too little information to come up with any truly plausible theories, though. When the demon spirit reached the mountain's peak, Han-sun realized that the mountaintop was flat. It was about the size of a basketball court, and there was a building standing at its center. The building had 2 floors, and it appeared to have been constructed out of a beautiful variety of wood. The building was surrounded by ornately fenced gardens. The gardens were full of greenery, but they weren't beautiful or well kept. They were quite ugly, and only the walls that enclosed them were nice. A wooden gate provided an opening in the fence. As they approached the gate, Han-sun saw a plank of wood stuck in the earth. 3 words were written down on it. No love house. No love house. What does that mean? Han-sun wondered. The demon spirit drifted to a stop just outside the fence. The wooden door wasn't locked, but he seemed to have decided against going into the yard. He stood outside the fence, looking toward the window on the 2nd floor. Han-sun thought the demon spirit might do something interesting, but he just stood there for about an hour. He didn't move an inch. Purple Fight, what are you doing here? I don't want to see you, said a woman's voice from the 2nd floor. Her tone was hard and distant. The demon spirit stayed where he was. He didn't move, and his eyes remained locked on the 2nd floor window. The woman inside the wooden house pushed open the window and looked at the demon spirit angrily. She gnashed her teeth and said, "Get lost. I don't want to see you again. Either grant me that wish or just kill me." Han-sun, hearing the name Purple Fight, thought it sounded very familiar. After he searched his memory, he placed the name. His eyes and mouth opened wide in shock. This name is like a clap of thunder in my ear. One of the 10 generals of Sacred was the invincible General Purple Fight. Han-sun had spent a lot of time researching Sacred. After his fight with the Purple Eye Butterfly, He carefully researched each of the 10 generals. Ultimately, however, he wasn't able to learn much about them. But from the little information he had gathered, this General Purple fight had struck him as being quite impressive. He was invincible even when fighting alone, which earned him the nickname, the Invincible Solo. The name perfectly captured how frightening General Purple fight was. There was a legend that said before Purple fight became a general, he was an enemy of Sacred Leader. At one point, Sacred Leader himself lost in a one-on-one fight against Purple fight. That was why Purple fight earned the title Invincible Solo. After that, Sacred Leader used some sort of trick to beat Purple fight and claim ownership over him. Purple fight became the strongest of Sacred's 10 generals. Is this demon spirit General Purple fight? Han Sun found it hard to believe. Out of the 10 generals, General Ghost Bone was the best when it came to leading armies, and Purple Eye Butterfly was the leader of intelligence gathering. But when it came to fighting alone, Purple fight was the greatest. In a one-on-one deathmatch, the leaders of the 3 highest races of the universe couldn't defeat him. The demon spirit saw the woman looking down on him, but he didn't say a word. He merely returned her gaze. Han Sun hesitated. He didn't know if he should stay in the demon spirit's eyes, or make the jump into the woman's eyes. The woman continued to send a string of blistering invectives and insults toward Purple fight, but the demon spirit merely looked at her without moving. He didn't react to her words, and it was almost as if he wasn't getting scolded at all. That made Han Sun wonder if the demon spirit wasn't actually the Purple fight the woman mentioned. When that woman grew tired of yelling, the demon spirit brought out an item. It appeared in the demon spirit's shadowy hand out of nowhere, and he carried it to the gate. He didn't touch the wood or the fence. When Han Sun saw the item that the demon spirit had set on the ground, his eyes brightened. It was a book. The book was made of stone, and there were 7 words written upon the cover. Shocking world record of the Extreme King. Holy shit! That is the Extreme King's exclusive Geno art. How did the demon spirit get a hold of it? Right, he must have gotten it from Bao Qin. Bao Qin must have had it somewhere on his person when he fought the demon spirit, Han Sun thought. When the woman saw the shocking world record of the Extreme King, she looked even more distraught. She screamed, "Purple fight! What is the point of you bringing me all the Geno arts in the world? They are meaningless to me. Either kill me or let me go." Han Sun was hesitant. He didn't know if he should stay in the demon spirit's eyes or jump to the eyes of this woman. From what the woman had said, he could guess that she had been imprisoned in this house by the demon spirit. If Han Sun leaped into her eyes, even if she never discovered his presence, there was a chance he might never leave that place. But if he stayed inside the eyes of the demon spirit, who knew how long he would have to remain inside the sea demon car? Twiddling his thumbs in the sea demon car for a few hundred years would be a pretty miserable fate. The woman should be easier to deal with than the demon spirit. Even if I'm discovered, it won't be as difficult to escape. Han Sun could feel that the demon spirit was on the precipice of leaving. Putting away his hesitation, Han Sun reflected himself into the eyes of the woman, before the demon spirit had a chance to break eye contact. With the woman's curses still echoing around him, the demon spirit walked back down the hill away from the house. As he watched the demon spirits receding back, Han Sun felt rather glum. Finally, back to normal. With the woman's vision, Han Sun could finally see colors again. It was a relief to have normal vision after being stuck in the monochromatic eyes of the demon spirit. When the woman saw that the demon spirit had finally left, she stopped swearing. Then, she turned away from the window. The woman glanced around, and as she did, Han Sun followed her gaze. The interior of the house was packed with bookshelves, and the bookshelves were all lined with books. The woman's eyes moved too quickly, however, which kept Han Sun from being able to read the titles on the books. The woman walked downstairs and left the house. Despite her earlier anger, the woman walked over to the book that the demon spirit had left on the grass and picked it up. When she returned to the house, the woman threw the shocking world record of the Extreme King on the floor. She stomped on it many times, discharging some of her leftover anger. A while later, The woman picked up the shocking world record of the Extreme King. She used a cloth to clean it, then placed it on a bookshelf. The woman grew restless after that. She stood up and moved back to that same bookshelf, repositioning the shocking world record slightly. Does this woman have OCD? Hansen thought that the woman was a bit weird. There were no other creatures on this mountain. Only this one woman living alone in a wooden house. Hansen wanted to escape her eyes, but it appeared as if doing so would be impossible. I don't know what this woman is capable of. If her power is average, I can just wait until I'm sure that the demon spirit is gone. Then I can race out of her eyes to make an escape. In preparation for that eventuality, Hansen paid careful attention to the woman. The woman was definitely strange. When she was done fiddling with the book, she went to sit at the window and peer outside. Hansen realized that the clouds outside the island weren't white anymore. They were light yellow like butter. Hansen was happy. He brought out his Wuxia Rubik's Cube and filmed what could be seen from the window. He then sent it to the treasure identifier elder. Didn't you want to capture me and claim the bounty on my head? Come and try it, Hansen said to the Rubik's Cube after he made the film. After the treasure identifier elder received the footage from Hansen, he edited the clip and began streaming it. Hansen didn't know what effect this play might have, but for now, it was all he could do. Thankfully, the wooden house didn't have any mirrors or swords. Otherwise, if she looked into a mirror and noticed that her left eye was red, she'd realize there was a problem. The woman sat in front of the window for a long time. Hansen didn't know what she was thinking about, and he was starting to believe that she'd never move again. But after a while the woman finally moved. The woman sighed deeply. She stood up and moved toward a desk. The desk was laden with stacks of books and documents. There were no tools that required electricity, but perhaps that was due to the magnetic storms that plagued the Tianxia system. Electric instruments probably wouldn't work here anyway. The woman's room was organized with the same fastidious attention to detail as the rest of the house. The items on the table were arranged tidily, and her books and notebooks were all lined up perfectly. All the pens were in the pen cup. The woman had serious OCD issues. When she sat down in front of the desk, she picked up the top notebook. She opened the notebook and flipped to an empty page. After a moment of thought, the woman wrote something down on the empty book. She assembled words, numbers, and symbols into a variety of formulas that Hansen was unable to comprehend. Hansen didn't know what the woman was doing. The woman wrote with repeated breaks for thought. Before long, she picked up a book from the bookshelf. She flipped through it quickly, apparently trying to find something specific. Phenomenon. Isn't that the Geno art that is similar to Sky Palace's textless book? Hansen thought in surprise. Phenomenon was a secret skill of Sky Palace as well. What happened next surprised Hansen even more. The woman kept pulling down and perusing different books, and those books were of the top Geno arts exclusive to a variety of different races. Many of them were guarded with the utmost secrecy. Hansen saw the Destroyed's Geno art 3 bodies in 1 destroyed Chaos Godlight, and the dragon's Evil Breaker Dragon Presence. Many other famous Geno arts that were known across the Geno universe were there, as well. There were also many names that Hansen had never even heard before. Who is this woman? And why does she have so many secret Geno arts here? Surely the spirit demon didn't steal them all just for her, right? That should be impossible. Those races wouldn't hand out their secrets for free. How many elites would really bring their secret Geno arts to Tianxia system just to get mugged? Hansen couldn't make sense of the situation. But as he watched, Hansen soon realized what she was doing. She was obviously researching the Geno arts. Because he didn't know what she was writing though, he couldn't understand the research she was doing. It was like when normal people made use of computer software. Although people might use a program every single day, if they saw a coder working on that same program, they wouldn't have a clue what they were seeing. Unless Hansen could see the Geno art she was researching, he wouldn't have a single clue to figure out what he was seeing. The symbols and formulas weren't enough for him to tell what she was working on. No, this won't work. If I keep it complete, no creature will be able to reach the required fitness level. Lowering the fitness requirements will dismantle the skill, so that would be useless. How do I keep it complete? And also lower the fitness requirements for practice? The woman mumbled to herself. She was putting an almost painful level of focus into the problem, but she couldn't seem to come up with any solutions. She grappled with the problem for a while longer, but she still couldn't figure it out. She walked over to the bookshelf, pulled down the shocking world record, and began reading through it. The shocking world record of the Extreme King. In the beginning of the Extreme King, the sky and ground welcomed this race. The woman said, reading the prologue in a smooth voice. She broke off, and a scornful chuckle rolled out of her throat. Very presumptuous. He was just a slave of sacred leader, so how dare he say that? It seems as if this woman is connected to the sacred leader somehow. It also looks like the Extreme King's alpha once belonged to sacred. Maybe as a low-level servant? Han Sun thought in surprise. The woman continued to read the shocking world record, and after a while, she started to look annoyed. I thought this would be something special, but it's just a half-assed version of sacred leader's blood spirit body. And this guy has the nerve to call it a king body. Very funny. Han Sen's eyes widened even further. No way. The Extreme King's king bodies were invented by the sacred leader? The woman looked at the book in her hands with distaste, but she continued to read it all the way through. As her eyes moved along the pages, Han Sun read the entirety of the shocking world record with her. Although this manuscript wasn't the original copy, it still had the exact same contents as the original shocking world record. It was a very powerful and multifaceted genoart. It had everything a person could want in it. If a member of the Extreme King had a king body of their own, they could find a skill to learn within the shocking world record. This slave stole my Geno world speech. He was kind of smart, honestly. He combined the Geno world speech with the blood spirit body. But the Geno world speech and the blood spirit body were each only half finished. No matter how they are combined, they won't reach the final stage. The woman had lost her interest in the shocking world record of the Extreme King. She placed it back on the shelf. Han Sun was frozen, and he thought, this woman doesn't look too old, but she speaks as if she was alive in Sacred Leader's day. Is such a thing possible? How has she survived for such a long time? Can't blame the slave, the woman said with a sigh. He couldn't bring himself up to the super gene level. Even the Sacred Leader and I failed continually, and he was just a slave with a slightly abnormal amount of intelligence. His achievements were respectable, all things considered. She proceeded to sit down on a chair. Han Sen's heart shook. What the hell? Is the super gene she mentioned related to the sanctuary somehow? The woman glanced through her notebook in boredom. She closed it and put it back. Then she sighed again. There are no clues to follow. I can't figure out why the story of genes can't be practiced, but lowering the practice requirements will make it impossible to generate a super gene. What am I supposed to do? Han Sen's throat had tightened into a knot, and he wanted to scream. The story of genes? She's researching the story of genes? Who is this woman? Maybe the Sacred Leader was correct. It's simply impossible to determine the faults in some genoarts. We need to find a way for creatures' genes to evolve more quickly, if we can hasten the speed at which genes evolve. But in that case, why would we need the story of genes? That way won't work. The woman shook her head tiredly. Han Sen's heart was like a sea tossed by a violent storm. It was full of scary waves and rattling winds. If what the woman said was true, she might have been the person who actually created the story of genes. She might have had a direct connection to the Sacred Leader, and maybe she even knew him personally. Han Sun wanted to run far away from this terrifying woman, but he wanted to find out her secrets even more. But he couldn't tell what level the woman might have been. If Han Sun could, he would have liked to tie the woman up and interrogate her until he had extracted every last bit of info she had to give. But considering that the woman might have hailed from the same era as the Sacred Leader, he shoved that thought away before it led him into doing something rash. There were too many unknowns here, but the bits and pieces he was putting together told him that if he challenged this woman, he could be in grave danger. If she had conducted research alongside Sacred Leader and considered the Extreme King as little more than servants, Her power had to be substantial. Perhaps she wasn't as strong as Purple Fight, but there was a high chance of her being a top-class deified. Han Sun wasn't confident that he could take on someone like that. If he revealed himself, he might be the one getting interrogated. Han Sun had to be patient. If the woman continued to talk to herself, she might reveal more secrets out loud. But she didn't talk to herself every day. Sometimes, she wouldn't say a single word. But whenever the demon spirit paid a visit, she seemed to blow a fuse. After screaming and cursing at the demon spirit until he left, she would talk to herself for the rest of the day while she cooled off. But she didn't voice any more secrets. The woman spent most of her time researching the story of genes. She used any genoart she was able to get her hands on to test and modify it. She tried many different methods, but none of them seemed to stick. As the woman worked in her notebook, Han Sun could see the story of genes. After a brief examination, he confirmed that it was truly the same genoart that he possessed. There were some differences though, because this woman's The Story of Genes had some modifications. Some parts of the genoart were more advanced than Han Sun's version. But there weren't many differences. Clearly, The Story of Genes had been completed a long time ago. But since practicing The Story of Genes in its original form was simply unfeasible, modifications had been required. In addition to the original version, the woman had experimented with hundreds of altered variants of the genoart. The woman had made each version unique in some way, hoping to find a new form of the genoart that was superior to the original. None of the attempts succeeded though. All the variants were, at the end of the day, failed experiments. Han Sun himself had practiced The Story of Genes. When he first started attempting to use the genoart, his fitness level had been far too low to actually practice the skill. But with the help of the black crystal armor, he was eventually able to perform The Story of Genes. Han Sun had spoken to Professor Bai Ishan about the genoart. No ordinary being could practice with The Story of Genes, because the fitness requirements were too dizzying to comprehend. The only way it could be learned, supposedly, was to have a body as perfect as a god's. Normal people had flaws in their bodies, and even minuscule flaws would make the genoart unlearnable. Han Sun watched the woman conduct research every day. Although she wasn't making any progress, Han Sun started to gain a much deeper understanding of the story of genes. There were many things he had never fully understood in the past, but now, they had become clear. While Han Sun was enjoying his newfound knowledge, the woman walked out of the wooden house. She went to a pool in the garden. She crouched down, and it appeared as if she was going to take a sip of the water. But when she saw her reflection, she froze. Oh no! Han Sun got a shock suddenly. The woman looked into her reflection in the pool. Her gaze suddenly sharpened. She can see me. Han Sun knew this was very bad, but he had already considered this eventuality. If the being Han Sun inhabited was close to a reflective surface, Han Sun knew his presence would be exposed sooner or later. So he didn't panic. When the woman saw the strange appearance of her eye, she didn't panic either. She smiled and said, "Interesting. You dared to use an eye trick on someone like me? You are brave." After that, the woman released a burning golden light in her eyes. It started in her pupils and spread across her irises, slowly fighting back the red and transforming it into gold. Han Sun's chest tightened. He didn't know what sort of power that woman had employed, but after the gold light consumed her eyes, the woman put away her power. As soon as she released her power, the gold color extinguished and the red reappeared. My golden eye didn't work. This is tricky, the woman said with a pleased smile. The color of her eye changed again. This time, a deep black swept over her irises. The black rolled over the entirety of her eyeballs, overwhelming the red. Once her eyes had fallen completely into darkness, the woman stopped feeding power into the technique she had used. Once again, as soon as she released the technique, the red returned to her eyes. Darkness eye didn't work either. Fascinating. The woman proceeded to try many different eye talents as she attempted to expunge Han Sun, but they only succeeded in making his vision go funny. Nothing seemed to affect the power of the blood eye evil god beast soul though. Han Sun was delighted with the performance of his beast soul. So this is the power of a mutant deified beast soul. Even this woman cannot do anything against me. How interesting. The woman was now smiling widely. Rather than being upset at her repeated failures, she looked thrilled. After that, the woman didn't use any more eye skills. She raised her fingertips and gathered up some sort of light. Wisps of spiritual light rose from her fingertips, turning into a mirror that hovered before her face. The mirror hung before the woman's eye, but there was no human reflection inside it. A weird light swirled around the surface of the silver mirror, and eventually, it turned a deep red color and began to coil in tighter and tighter swirls. In moments, the red color had changed to depict the face of the Blood-Eye Evil God. Ah, it is Blood-Eye Evil God. No wonder my eye skills didn't work. When the woman saw the image of Blood-Eye Evil God, she smiled in sudden understanding. She raised her finger and pressed it to her forehead just above her eyes. More spiritual light went into her. The woman's eyes shattered like glass. The shadowy space that Han Sun inhabited collapsed, and he was forced to come out. He fell onto the ground and immediately tried to leap away from the house. What's this? That isn't Blood-Eye Evil God, the woman murmured in surprise. Her eyes healed immediately, and her hands never stopped moving. She raised one hand, and a crystal ball flew toward Han Sun to trap him. Han Sun moved to evade the crystal ball, but the woman shifted the position of her hand and cast a few lights that struck Han Sun with pinpoint precision. Han Sun's body became much heavier, and his speed dropped drastically. A deep ache sank into his back, and he felt as if he had ejaculated prematurely and then become impotent. He was suddenly struck with the pain of a woman's period, and his eyesight became blurry. Pain and nausea swept through him. God only knew how many Geno arts the woman had cast to give him such a wretched series of debilitations. Han Sun used his jade skin area, which transformed his body into jade-like ice. The woman's debilitating Geno arts no longer worked on Han Sun, allowing him to dodge the second crystal attack. Then he leaped out the window. The woman's face looked like the face of a cat in pursuit of a mouse. It was as if she had made a fascinating discovery. She ran out of the wooden house too. Han Sun wanted to fly away and escape the island, but as soon as he moved, he saw the crystal ball racing toward him. Han Sun evaded it, but the crystal ball exploded. It transformed into a giant crystal net that covered the entire island. Han Sun had nowhere to run. Han Sun's fingers wriggled like mad, casting sword silks as he attempted to lift the net of crystal. He kept the net from falling on him, and his mind raced to find a way out of this predicament. After a few of her attacks, though, Han Sun noticed that the woman wasn't as strong as he initially believed her to be. She had the power of a king-class being at the most he wagered, but she possessed such a variety of Geno arts that she could do almost anything. She had an infinite supply of surprises up her sleeve, that was for sure. When she saw that her crystal net couldn't trap Han Sun, the woman changed her approach. Her fingers became like blades, and she used all sorts of Geno arts to attack. Han Sun had a hard time dealing with her. Han Sun had encountered many powerful opponents in his time, and some of them had learned many skills, but this woman could use literally anything. She could fuse a dozen skills into a single attack. He had never seen anything like this before. Her attack might start out as fire powers, but when they got close to Han Sun, they might transform into gold or water powers. An attack might rage toward him, but then become as soft as a kiss when it landed. Her fingers, palms, knives, and swords didn't allow Han Sun a moment to breathe. This wasn't a fight. It was like the woman was conducting an artistic performance of many tricks. Han Sun fought to defend himself, but he couldn't win. And with the crystal net in place over the island, Han Sun knew that he couldn't escape. The woman looked shocked too, though. Han Sun's attacks were very familiar to her in some ways, but they were also quite different than she expected. Sky Palace's textless book isn't completely the same, but it is just. And the breaking power is not the same. Fascinating. The woman was captivated by Han Sun's skills. The woman knew too many Geno arts. Han Sun used skills that he thought would take advantage of the woman's weaknesses. But she always used another unexpected Geno art to escape every crisis. And Han Sun found himself fighting for his life instead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I came here purely by happenstance. I mean you no harm, so please forgive me, Han-sun pleaded, as he continued to fight. Use a few more Geno arts. I have seen these before, the woman commanded, not actually responding to Han-sen's plight. Han-sen knew many Geno arts, but he didn't think that this situation called for them. Instead, he stuck with skills that he knew could counter her attacks. The woman, seeing that Han-sun was only using a few skills to break all of her Geno arts, looked profoundly annoyed. Down! The woman waved her hand, and the crystal net snapped Han-sen's sword silks and fell toward him. Many substance chains now writhed within the crystal net. She's deified. Han-sun realized that the woman had been playing with him. She hadn't used her real powers up until now. Han-sun had the strong urge to use his super god spirit power to escape the falling net, but ultimately, he chose not to. Instead, he allowed himself to be captured by the crystal net. Who are you? How are you using abilities that should belong only to the Blood-Eye Evil God? The woman asked Han-sun, who was now trapped on the ground like a fish in a net. I am Prince 16 of the Extreme King. My name is Bai Yi. I gained the Blood Evil Eye powers by accident. Before Han-sun could finish, the woman's face hardened. She tightened the crystal net that snared him, dragging Han-sun up into the air. How dare you lie to me? You are a crystallizer that has disguised themselves as one of the Extreme King. Blood Evil Eye is Blood-Eye Evil God's Geno art. It should be impossible to wield, unless you have the Blood-Eye Evil God's genes. Do you think I'm stupid? The woman demanded. She gestured furiously at Han-Senator. A substance chain appeared, and it lashed Han-Senator. The whip cut so deeply into Han-sen's flesh that bone was visible through the wound. If you already knew I was a crystallizer, why didn't you just say so? Han-sen thought, grinding his teeth. Out loud he said, I'm a crystallizer, but I'm a mixed breed. My body has a little of the Extreme King's blood in it, and I also have some of the Blood-Eye Evil God's blood. Whoosh. Before Han-sun could finish, the woman lashed him again. Her eyes looked like they were trying to bore holes into Han Sr. Mixed my ass. Is being a crystallizer not good enough for you? Why would you submit yourself to that slave race? And Blood-Eye Evil God's blood? Tell me, how did that work out? The woman was so angry that she kept whipping Han-sen's body. Han-sun swore to himself that he would never provoke another female researcher. Her temper was really bad. But Han-sun realized something. When he saw how angry the woman had become because he pretended to be an extreme king, he hastily said, Lady, you are a crystallizer too, yes? Do you know Left Crazy? Left Crazy and I are best friends. You know Left Crazy? The woman was both surprised and confused, and both emotions showed clearly on her face. I know him, and we are very close. I learned a Geno art from him. Han-sun said hurriedly when he confirmed that Left Crazy's name carried some weight with this woman. The woman wasn't interested in what Han-sun was saying though. She looked at him with disdain. Left Crazy is too nice. You are a crystallizer. Even if you were his enemy, he would still be willing to teach you if you were willing to learn. Learning Geno arts from him doesn't mean that you're actually close to him. Although she said that, the woman still relented and put away her crystal net. She freed Han-sun from his bindings. What is your name, lady? Do you know Left Crazy as well? Han-sun asked the woman as he stood up and brushed the dust off of himself. The woman really was a crystallizer, which surprised Han-Senator according to what Han-sun had learned thus far. The crystallizers appeared sometime after Sacred had been destroyed. The crystallizers never had a deified in their ranks either. That woman had conducted research alongside Sacred Leader though. That must have meant she was a powerful figure in the era of Sacred's reign. The woman ignored Han-sen's inquiry. She looked at him and said, You are of the crystallizer blood, but how are your body's genes able to evolve so fast? My genes are fast. Han-sun asked, feigning ignorance. The woman looked at Han-sun with a frown. She said to herself, This shouldn't be. My crystallizers finished their tests as a failure. Their fitness was weak, and only their intelligence was at a passable level. How could this one have evolved so fast? When Han-sun heard that, he was surprised. He looked at the woman and asked, You created the crystallizers? The woman shook her head. Not exactly. The crystallizers already existed, but I used Sacred's resources to modify the genes of the crystallizers. I sped up the progress of their evolution. It was not much of a success, but it worked out better than I had expected. Their fitness and evolution progress were bad, but they were very intelligent. They made perfect assistants for my work, and Left Crazy was one of them. After that, the woman walked back toward the wooden house. Because the woman had stopped threatening Han's son, he no longer wanted to leave. He wanted to learn as many secrets as he could, straight from this horse's mouth. Based on the woman's story, it was clear she had once been a prestigious person in Sacred. She must have been the head of a research department or something like that. She must have known a lot. That means you created the story of genes? Hansen asked as he reached the door. Half of it. Sacred Leader and I built the story of genes together, but it failed. The woman looked at Hansen and went on to say, Left Crazy showed you the story of genes. Hansen nodded, but he didn't tell her that he practiced the story of genes. If she found out that he had studied the story of genes, he was worried that she might decide she needed to dissect him and analyze the pieces. Stop there, the woman said sternly as Hansen was about to step into the house. You stand outside. Don't track dirt into my house, the woman continued. Sending a cold glance toward Han. Senator Hansen knew that the woman meant no harm. She was just a very hygienic woman, with a bad case of OCD. He didn't mind her brusqueness. He stood outside the door and said, What did you do during your time researching the story of genes with Sacred Leader? I have heard that it is related to Super Gene. The woman went into the house and grabbed a shovel. She came out and started to fix the ground where Hansen had disturbed the grass while fighting. You. Start floating. Don't touch anything here, the woman said. She then sprayed Hansen with a perfume. Hansen made himself float as the woman commanded. He wanted to learn about the relationship between the story of genes and Super Gene, and also their relation to the sanctuaries. The woman kept cleaning where Hansen had walked, and she said, We researched the story of genes so that creatures could learn to use Super Gene. Did Left Crazy not teach you that? No. He only told me that the requirements of the story of genes hadn't been fulfilled, and thus, there were limits to what he could investigate. Hansen kept trying to get her to tell him more. The woman really didn't mind the bean spilling, so she went on to say, I cannot believe Left Crazy is still researching the story of genes. He was right though. There are requirements for the story of genes that were never fulfilled. Even now it is a failed research project. What is Super Gene? What is Super Gene used for? Hansen asked, trying not to let his voice betray how badly he wanted this answer. The woman looked at Hansen with an odd expression. As she stared, she asked, Do you believe God exists? Why am I being asked this crappy question again? Hansen wondered, annoyed. This was a question he couldn't care less about answering. Hansen sighed and said, I've met a couple of guys who called themselves gods. But I don't know if they were real gods. Those gods you met, did they claim to be able to fulfill your wishes? The woman squinted at Hans. Senator Hansen's heart jumped. He had gotten to the crux of the issue already, and so he quickly answered, yes. The woman quirked her lips into a smile. Running her hand through her hair, she said, Becoming Super Gene means killing these guys who call themselves God. Why are you trying to do that? Hansen was shocked. He knew how scary those beings were. But luckily, they couldn't directly attack the beings of the universe. Their powers were much stronger than any creature within the Geno universe. Not even deified beings could be compared to them. The woman and Sacred Leader had wanted to kill these self-proclaimed gods. And Hansen shared their insane desire. He just wasn't strong enough right now, so he didn't know how he would eventually bring the gods down. Because of this, Hansen had no plans to kill a god just yet. When he had been inside Destiny's Tower of the Extreme King, he had only seen the statue of a god. If the black crystal armor hadn't helped him, he would have been incapable of defeating the thing. He couldn't imagine how scary things might have been if he faced a real god. I don't know why Sacred Leader was pursuing this goal, but I know I had my reasons. The woman obviously not wanting to share her actual reason. Having a super gene can allow a person to kill those gods? Han-sun asked. According to my research, yes. That is correct. The woman nodded, speaking with certainty. But then the woman shook her head, smiling wryly. But our research still failed. We discovered a method that could turn a body into a super gene. But there was no creature in this universe that could use this method. It was like we were holding a candle. And we knew we could light it. But we didn't have a single match to do so. We were so close to dispelling the darkness, but we couldn't. That was the difficulty we faced. The thing that we lacked to complete the story of genes seemed like an insurmountable barrier. It made all of our efforts seem fairly pointless. Is the story of genes that difficult to practice? There really wasn't anyone across the entire universe who could use it? Han-sun asked in confusion. After all, he had already learned the story of genes. The woman thought for a moment, then said, "This problem is very complicated, and explaining it fully would take some time. Let me use an analogy instead. A horse needs to eat plants for energy, so it can stay alive and run. However, a car requires fuel in order to operate. You cannot give the horse fuel, and you cannot give the car grass. This description isn't perfect, but it sort of gets across what I mean. The story of genes has many requirements, and there is no creature in the universe that can satisfy every one of them. You cannot lack in any department." Han-sun pretended to understand, but he actually rather confused. He started to ask another question, but he just didn't know how to explain what he didn't understand. Who are those people that call themselves gods? Why can only those with a super gene kill them? Han-sun returned the conversation to the initial question. That question is also complicated. To put it simply, these gods are creatures, but they exist in a different way than we do. It's like the difference between corporeal life forms and spirits. But the reality is more complicated, especially when one tries to understand how they interact with our universe. The woman paused, and then she went on to say, "And you asked why those with a super gene can kill those who claim to be gods? It all began with a test conducted by the sacred leader." "What test?" Han-sun asked. The woman didn't answer Han-senator. She stood up and said, "Okay, the garden's clean now. Don't you dare make this place dirty again. If you do, I'll turn you into a pig." Han-sun still hung in the air, not daring to touch the ground. He was worried she really would do what she claimed. Considering the woman's power, she probably had a stronger gene-altering skill than Burning Lamp Alpha did. "You still haven't told me what sort of test the sacred leader conducted," Han-sun said to the woman as he hovered in the air. The woman turned around and looked at Han Sr. "Why do I have to tell you?" Han-sun didn't know how to respond. She had no connection to him, and she didn't know him anything. There really was no reason for her to tell him. Pang. While Han-sen's mind raced for an answer, the woman returned to the house and slammed the door. Should I tell this woman I have practiced the story of genes? If I tell her, I might learn more secrets from her. But she also might catch me and use me as some sort of lab rat. That would be bad. Han-sun found it to be quite the dilemma, and he was torn on what to do. The woman had said Han-sun wasn't allowed to touch her stuff. Han-sun didn't want to upset her cleanliness and OCD, so he flew over the fence and landed on the ground outside. He sat there, looking up at the yellow clouds. He pulled out the Wuxia Rubik's Cube and sent a video to the Treasure Identifier Elder. When the Treasure Identifier Elder had played Han-sun last video, it had drawn the focus of all the other races. That light yellow clouds became the focus of many elites. When this new video came out, many factions were able to confirm Han-sen's location based on the changes in the cloud patterns. But because the demon spirit was probably close by, no one dared to go. The Extreme King wasn't very concerned about it though. Bao Qin had retreated after he was injured, but the Extreme King had hurriedly sent out more deified elites to prowl through the Tianxia system. Han-sun sat on the island for hours, trying to decide whether or not he should tell the woman that he had practiced the story of genes. Suddenly, the sea of clouds rumbled. Many giant cloud dragons came roaring out of the veil, pulling the sea demon car to the island. The demon spirit is here. Han-sun was shocked, and he hastily decided to run. The woman hadn't killed him, but that didn't mean that the demon spirit would spare him. "You come in," said the woman. He looked up to see her head poking out a window. Han-sun answered by running into the garden. Feet. The woman frowned. Han-sun quickly jumped into the air. He flew through the garden, then floated into the house, being careful not to touch anything. He hung in the center of the building, as far away from all of the house's contents as he could get. Don't say anything, and don't make a noise, the woman advised him with a frown. Han-sun nodded but made no further answer. Good boy. The woman smiled, pleased with Han-sun's performance. Just like the previous 2 times that Han-sun had seen, the demon spirit stood outside the fence and stared up at the window. The woman ignored him for half the day, becoming grumpier with every second that passed. In the end, she couldn't help but open the window and shout at him. When the woman grew tired of yelling and subsided into silence, the demon spirit left. It was as if he had come there just so the woman could shout at him. Whatever was going on between the two of them, they obviously had a lot of history. Han-sun was curious about the relationship between the woman and the demon spirit, but he knew it would be best not to ask the woman just yet. He could see the anger and scorn still etched deeply into her face. Do you want to know who that is? The woman asked. She turned around, her intense eyes landing on Han-sun like physical weights. No. Han-sun shook his head without thinking. He felt fear when she asked him, and he knew nothing good would come from that particular answer. The woman was shocked, but she laughed. She narrowed her eyes slightly as she examined Han Sr. Do you want to know what sort of test Sacred Leader conducted? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.